Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update. Due to family commitments and Saturdays and blah, 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 I'm doing a live stream to kind of do everything all at once, apart from probably the front line. I won't be able to cover the front line in the time given today, and prepping that up, it takes a little bit more research and whatnot. But I have got a lot of content to share with you. I've got Matthew Bishop, who's joined me on a previous live or two over in Australia. He's married to a Ukrainian. You guys know him as Sabrint on the threads. He's going to drop in after he's eaten his dinner to just give us a hand with managing comments in the threads and whatnots. Please let me know if you can hear me all right, if you can see me all right. I'm just going to switch to this view so we can go through all the content together. We're going to start where we normally start, which is with the Ukrainian general. No, we're not. We're going to stop sharing the entire screen. So that was clever. Good start, JP, wasn't it? Okay, we're going to go back to sharing that. And we are going to go to where we normally start, which is Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. As ever. So what do we have for the day before? These are, remember, indicative. 510 sounds good. Excellent. 510 personnel lost for the day before. 11 tanks, 21 APVs. I mean, goodness me, that is a huge figure to have lost yesterday. So when I say these are indicative, they are indicating something. So what is being indicated here? Well, there must have been some serious activity yesterday concerning mechanized equipment, some either frontline activity going on in Robotina area, for example, or we have heard, I mean, I'm going to go back to the map if I may. So there's a lot of activity going on in Robotina. I'm not doing a frontline update, as I said, but I will dip into the frontline. So there is the claim that the Ukrainians have claimed this morning. Their spokesperson has claimed that they have broken through in the Verbove area. So that and they have been using mechanized equipment there. So I assume there's going to be a high level of activity around there involving quite a lot of equipment on both sides. But also, I mean, listen to Andrew Perpetua's live stream last night, where they're talking about all the losses for the Russians up in the Svatova area in this sector, the Ryhorodka, Novoherivka, that tiny village there, where the Russians have assaulted. And I told you weeks back that on one day they lost 6 tanks. The next day they tried it again. They were talking about literally dozens of pieces of equipment. I showed you some imagery of some of that destroyed equipment over the last couple of days. It's just to say that, man, there are places where the Russians have terrific losses, and it's just not good for them. And that's one of those places. But anyway, when we go back to think about the losses where they could come from, there could be any flashpoint where the Russians have decided to attack. But if it's under really good fire control, the area that they're attacking in, they're going to lose a lot of equipment because the Ukrainians have pretty precise artillery compared to the Russians. Anyway, going on there, 33 pieces of artillery that have been lost, and that's another phenomenally bad day for the Russians. I do question the accuracy of the claims about artillery. We know that a lot of the footage isn't coming out. It just, they don't have the time or the wherewithal or the desire to pump out every bit of footage they've got, right? They're only going to produce footage on the socials that has some kind of utility for them. Do they need to prove that they're destroying every piece of equipment? No, they don't. But are they making claims that are maybe overconfident in what they are destroying? Quite possibly. Although they do have a criteria to adhere to with regard to like a protocol for submitting these figures to their commanders and so on and so forth, and then they compile it and it eventually gets to the general staff. Apparently there is a strict kind of threshold for evidence for these claims. Yet still, there's going to be elements of human error. There's going to be elements of like, oh, I reckon that's destroyed when it might not have been destroyed. It's something might have bounced off it, like we've seen with Lancet, so on and so forth. So this is why some people, I keep saying recently, as other analysts have said, take 20% off and you'll be there. But even if you took 20% off 33, that is a massive number. So take 6, 7 off there. You've got 26 pieces of artillery being taken out. Well, that's a massive number still. 4 multiple launch rocket systems, that is significant. 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems. Of course, it depends what that is, what they are, what value systems they are. 8 drones, 1 cruise missile, that'll be from the night before rather than last night, and then 26 vehicles and fuel tanks. I spoke to Andrew Perpetua. I reached out to him and said, look, we're seeing some massive numbers. So prior to today, so we got 33 artillery systems lost today. And then 2 days ago, there were 40 and then 40 again yesterday. And I said, like, these are ridiculous figures. I mean, these are not ridiculous. These are really high figures. What's going on there? And his opinion was that the Russians, he said, the Ukrainians are struggling to get hold of targets. They're struggling to acquire targets at the moment, which is an indication that they have just chomped through a whole load of Russian equipment to the point where the drone operators are struggling to find things to blow up. So I thought that was an interesting nugget that he had from some of his sources. He reckons that maybe it is a bit over-egged with some of these bits of equipment, but he says that they are still losing significant amounts on a daily basis. And when you start seeing them cycled through, going back to actually what he's saying with struggling to find targets, I wonder whether you're starting to see so many bukankas, so many loaves, so many civilian vehicles, being used, but also being targeted. I think it talks to the idea that the Russians are running out of military trucks because they have been blown up so much, but also it could be a case that drone operators have taken out so much stuff near the front lines that they're having to go back and search for things further back that end up being, these bukankas that are being used to ferry people or equipment from here to there that maybe 3 months ago they wouldn't have been aiming for because actually they had more immediate threats nearer the front line. But now actually they've taken out most of the stuff that's hanging out near the front line and they're moving back. And that's why you're seeing a preponderance of these other sorts of vehicles. So then when we go to Andrew Perpetua's list that he compiles on a daily basis, yesterday it's got back to there being an advantage to the Ukrainians in terms of a ratio of Russian losses to Ukrainian losses. And when we look here, there's actually a lot of tanks. He's seen footage of 6 tanks getting taken out, which is significant, and then a lot of IFVs. So we go back to the general staff figures, and you're thinking, well, 21 APVs, that's a lot of armored personnel vehicles. And then you go back and see this. Well, actually, as a representative number there, the IFVs there are a lot of infantry fighting vehicles and APCs, add that in to as a proportion of the rest of the stuff that have been taken out. Now, going back to the kind of trucks, yes, there's a truck and a Kamaz, but on previous days, we've seen like an absolutely huge number of civilian vehicles being taken out in these lists. And that goes to what I was just talking about. Anyway, when we go to the Ukrainian side of things, we have a couple of STRV. These are the 122. These are the Swedish variants of the Leopard 2 tanks. And they have, when I was watching his live stream, they're not sure whether they are particularly badly damaged. One Lancet seemed to bounce off the I'm going to call it Leopard 2, the Stringsvagen or whatever it is. One Lancet bounced off one. It might not have done too much damage. The other one did have a smoking turret, but other than that, don't really know. So it could be that those 2 vehicles are back on the road within a few days, or one might not be damaged at all. So interesting. But anyway, 2 of them were acquired as targets, and you've got a couple of MRAPs and APCs. So anyway, that's what Andrew Perpetua sees there. Right, we're going to go to task and purpose for hits and losses. I'm not going to show you too many videos of what's going on here in terms of like this is being blown up, that's been targeted. I've shown you lots of them. I thought this was an interesting task and purpose article, which is a freighter full of sheep has sunk a Russian spy ship in the Black Sea. So let's just have a look at this. A Russian spy ship sank in the Black Sea on Thursday after colliding with a vessel 25 miles off the coast of Turkey's busy Bosphorus Strait, according to the Associated Press. But this was no war game or close call by agreed geopolitical foes, but an embarrassing mistake. The Russian Navy vessel Liman, a 1,560-ton reconnaissance ship classified as a research ship with the country's Black Sea fleet, sank after colliding with a freighter full of sheep out of Romania. Yes, freaking sheep. According to the New York Times, local media reports indicate that the freighter involved the Yusarif H, a livestock carrier touting the Togolese flag and carrying nearly 9,000 sheep from Romania to Jordan. The ship survived intact and helped rescue several Russian sailors. The war zone has some additional content on the Liman and Bosphorus Strait. Despite its official classification, the Liman, a Project 861 MOMA class, is designed to gather intelligence above and below the waves. The ships have radars, hydroacoustic listening gear, and other unspecified reconnaissance equipment. According to RT, these sensors allow the crew to locate, track, and scoop up information about both surface ships and submarines. Before the accident, Russia had 3 of these Polish-built Soviet-era ships, which have a displacement of 1,560 tons, still in service. It's obviously great news for the Ukrainians for the Russians to lose what's probably although it's a fairly old ship, it's going to be fairly high value that provides capabilities for the Russian in terms of ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance in the Black Sea. That's really useful. All I can say is thank you very much. I'm going to drink to Romanian sheep. Good on them. I mean, that's a bad day at the office for the Russians. Thank you. I'm here all night. Try the veal. Right. Okay. So moving on to one other bit of footage that is kind of worth having a look at. American Stryker armored personnel carrier equipped with mine trawl returns after battle near Robotina with damaged wheels. I mean, you wonder whether that's from the battle or from mines exploding. One that maybe it missed with the mine roller has taken out its tire. But the interesting thing is you can see it can still operate with possibly 2 wheels out there, 3 wheels. So those back 3 seem to have flat tires. I'll try and make that a little bit bigger. I'm going to watch out for the music, though. You know, no one wants to hear that this time in the morning. So it's not the morning, it's the afternoon. So here we have, goodness me, I'm wondering whether all the tires are a little bit knackered there. But certainly the back 3. Yeah, so that goes to show that there is some kind of resilience for these vehicles that allows them to do their job. Right, we're going to go now to a whole different group of tabs I have ready for you, and this concerns what took place in Crimea yesterday. And this is really, really significant, and it's significant not only for the losses that took place yesterday, but for really what's going on in Crimea. I think we have moved to a stage in a war where Crimea is becoming untenable. And we'll come on to this in a second. It was an excellent day at the office for the Ukrainians yesterday with regard to strikes on Crimea. So what happened? Okay, here's the moment a missile hit the headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. So the headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Fleet was hit yesterday, and it was hit by at least 2 Storm Shadow missiles. And actually, you can see that missile hit clearly there as it comes down and it explodes. So some Ukrainian media are reporting that Russian Black Sea Fleet commander Sokolov may have been killed as a result of the AFU missile attack. So be warned, this kind of news came out early doors. I'm trying to find it. Yeah. So there is no official confirmation from Russian authorities, but it's reported that the commander of the Black Sea Fleet, Admiral Viktor Sokolov, died during today's missile strike on Sevastopol. I don't think that's true. It appears that he's injured and possibly very seriously so. No report says this would be pretty big fish. This is the highest ranking, as far as I understand it, the highest ranking, equal highest ranking Russian naval commander. So he's in charge of the Black Sea Fleet. This is absolutely bloomin' massive. Sorry, that's I forgot to change the tab. When I'm doing it on a live stream, it doesn't record me moving from tab to tab. So I have to physically change the tab each time. So apologies. I will forget to do that a number of times, no doubt. Anyway, going back to what Nexter was saying, but what I was saying is that this is massive, right? The admiral of the Black Sea Fleet, the commander of the Black Sea Fleet has been taken out of action, right? Possibly dead, but probably not. And a number of other people were. So what was happening is there was a big old meeting in this building. And it appears that special forces, or it appears that intelligence have got hold of this meeting taking place. Now, there are rumors that Atesh who are a partisan group in the area, had said that they provided the intelligence, and they've got hold of some of that intelligence because there are two Russian naval personnel who haven't been paid, who are like annoyed that they haven't been paid. This is one of the rumors, and so they gave out information that this meeting was going to take place and where it's going to take place, and then there were pinpoint strikes by Storm Shadow missiles. But this was on the back of drones overwhelming air defenses, decoy missiles supposedly being sent as well, doing all these things so that the air defenses are overwhelmed. I mean, this is what the Russians have tried to do earlier in the war, when they were doing sort of massive wave attacks to overwhelm the Ukrainian air defenses. Well, the Ukrainians are doing this themselves with a whole variety of ordnance, of weaponry, and as a result, that allowed one of the highest value targets to be taken, to be hit here, which is the headquarters. Now, the day before, there were claims that there was, I wonder if I can find it on here. I haven't got it on my map, but basically the headquarters for the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Goodness me, I'm never going to find this now. It's a building, obviously a building somewhere around here that was hit. But the day before, if you remember, there was a building somewhere over here that was half destroyed, and it was touted as being the command, where they'd taken the command out of Sevastopol and had it somewhere around here. But actually, it wasn't command, as far as I can work out. It was a comms place that was basically really, really high value target, and half the whole building was destroyed. And the theory is that now renders Sevastopol really, really kind of impotent as far as being a naval command center. So the comms and the naval command building have been hit, and there's claims now that will have to take place from Novorossiysk, much further back, and the comms will have to be working out of there. So that is a hugely valuable target. Remember, I talk about how it's not just the value of the things that are blown up, but the value of the changes of behavior that are enforced by certain strikes. So here, there's an operational, maybe even, there's an operational effect of hitting some of these targets. So I think that's really significant to know. Anyway, going back to here, so some Ukrainian media reporting that the chap may have been killed, but I don't think that's true. The Russian Defense Ministry initially reported that one person was killed in the strike on the Black Sea Fleet headquarters in Sevastopol, but later the ministry clarified the wording and said that the person was missing. There were people like Johnny Miller, who's a British journalist who was reporting at the time, and I showed you the video yesterday, said, oh, air defense is active. And it's clearly not air defense. It was the sound of Storm Shadow missiles hitting that building. And it was like, oh, yeah, air defense is active, doing its job type thing. You're like, nah. So here's another video of the headquarters being hit here. So this is from MASH, which is, I think, a Russian media source. So as you can see there, that is the naval headquarters, not looking too good. And two missiles hit. You can see here from this kind of GIF type thing. Two missiles hit. One hit there and another hit there. This side was already out of commission, or at least had been out of commission. There was scaffolding on it previously because that had been hit by drone attacks was it last year? I don't know. Nonetheless, I understand that they did claims that they did a double tap strike here. So there are times when there are things double taps done on purpose, which is we're going to hit here, and then when people come and help out, or when people move to another place because of that first strike, we're going to do a second strike. So one theory is that this was a double tap strike, that they hit one part and then hit a second part which would have been the exit for the people running away from being hit by the first part. So you would have then got the survivors of the first missile being hit getting hit with the second missile. So that it's either a double tap, or there's also the theory that they pretty much always send missiles, these high value targets, in tandem, because there's a high probability that one missile will either be a dud or will be hit by electronic warfare or will not hit exactly where it's supposed to. So you send two in to make sure that at least one of them hits. So either it's a double tap or it's that, or kind of a mixture of both. But nonetheless, oops, I'm not showing you this tab. There's a GIF. I keep forgetting to do that. Anyway, the what I was pointing out is that you've got this part of the roof that was hit, and then this part, or it might have been this part hit first and then that part. So this is smoking. That's not. Some are claiming that the missile didn't actually explode when it hit that part of the wing. That is a claim that's coming out as well. So lots of claims around this, but it at least two missiles struck, and damage was done to a very high value target, including potentially the commander of the entire Black Sea Fleet, and that is really, really significant. So let's look at a couple more sources concerning this. Budanov said that, so he's head of the intelligence, said that as a result of the attack on the HQs of the Russian Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol, at least 9 people were killed and 16 were injured. Among them is Colonel General Alexander Romanchuk, commander of the Russian Armed Forces Group in the Zaporizhia direction. So that is huge as well. That's not the admiral we were just talking about. That is someone else. And then someone says, and Sokolov couldn't confirm. So there's different theories about who was taken out, whether this person was or whether that person was. Anyway, going on to another source here. So P*11 saying, Ukraine may have targeted a key meeting of Russian generals in Sevastopol. Among the wounded is a commander of the group, Colonel General Romanchuk, in a very serious condition. The Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Sekov, is unconscious. Of course, take all these claims with a pinch of salt. The number of injured ordinary servicemen who are not employees of the headquarters is still being determined. These are the military who were on duty, security, and so on. They are not included in the list that I announced to you. Alexander Romanchuk is the commander of the group of Russian forces in the Zaporizhia direction. He received the rank of Colonel General in 2023. Lieutenant General Oleg Tsekov is the commander of the 200 OMSBR coastal forces in the Northern Fleet of the Russian Navy. At the same time, Budanov did not confirm reports about the alleged death of the commander of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation, Admiral Sokolov. There is currently no information about his condition in the GUR. By the way, Colonel General Romanchuk leads the Russian forces in Zaporizhia, where the main direction of Ukraine's counteroffensive is taking place. This indicates that this was not just a blow to the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet, but a blow to key senior figures during the meeting. This is absolutely huge. I wanted to do a breaking news update on this last night, but I'd already done one on the ATACMS, which we're going to talk about in a second anyway. And I just thought I can't talk to you with more of my face. Anyway, moving on. As I've said, there are claims about the commander, but as I've told you, may or may not be true, and he may or not be injured and or dead. Or dead. You can't be injured and dead. That's a bit silly. Right, Ukrainian defenders have made a strike on the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet of temporarily occupied Sevastopol. That's just another image I wanted to show you of the building. And then here we have the reactions. So some of the reactions to this, I think, are pretty revealing. So Russian Telegram channels are reacting with frustration to Ukraine's attack on Black Sea Fleet headquarters. Some of the more interesting reactions here, says Samuel Romani. So former Kremlin advisor Sergei Markov admits the Russian air defenses have serious vulnerabilities after Ukraine struck the fleet to HQ with Storm Shadows. Now, we have seen this concerted effort to take out S-400s and S-300s in the area. We've seen this in Cape Tarkankut. If I remind you of what took place, so we had S-400s, two systems or two batteries being targeted with varying degrees of success. Some claiming that both batteries are taken out. I don't know that we got the evidence to suggest that, but they were at least badly damaged and elements of them were taken out. And that means that these S-400s that would have been protecting the Russian well, would have been protecting Crimea by being able to hit uh, air threats in this area, would not been able to have done that, and so therefore that was a ripe old time for the Ukrainians to send in a load of um, missiles and drones and whatnot towards Sevastopol. So we'd seen these being taken out. The comms building, as I was talking to you about, being taken out. Radars. We had the special forces landing near Olenivka at Mayak and taking out another radar installation, I think. So this is all part of a much larger plan that appears to have worked really effectively. And the Russians are starting to admit that there are vulnerabilities, a clear repudiation of Russian Defense Ministry efforts to show the fallibility of Storm Shadow. So they keep saying that they've shot a bunch of them down. They may well have taken some down with electronic warfare and whatnot, but clearly Storm Shadows are doing some pretty significant damage and scalp. RT Chief Margarita Simonyan, you know her, predicts continued escalation from Ukraine's NATO partners unless Russia calls all of the West as responsible and holds them all to account. Basically, a call for Russia to declare war on NATO. I love this kind of talk. I don't love this talk because obviously it's incredibly dangerous and we could get to World War III. But the idea that some Russians genuinely think they should go to war with NATO, that they might have a chance, given they can't even beat Ukraine with a bunch of equipment, not the very best equipment being sent by NATO. It's like some obsolete equipment, some really decent equipment. HIMARS obviously very good, but like, can we give you some old Mirages and stuff like that? And we'll talk about that because it's not looking like that's going to happen now. But all of this bravado about Russian capability, and they can't defeat Ukraine. It's taken a year and a half to basically start getting a bit of a beating in certain areas. And to say, well, I think we should hold NATO responsible, we should go to war with NATO, that wouldn't last 5 minutes. Like the NATO Air Force could take out the Black Sea Fleet like that. And pretty much the Russian naval fleet combined, NATO would destroy Russia. I'm positive of that really quickly. So, I wouldn't go wishing for that, Simonian. So Sergei Mardan fumes that Russian elites are trying to freeze the Ukrainian war by the end of 2023, and the Black Sea Fleet attack is a proof of the futility of an unfinished war. He also says the attacks ends the myth of a bloodless takeover of Crimea. Absolutely true there. I don't think... well, it depends what you're trying to talk about. Is that the bloodless takeover by Russia in annexing Crimea, or that Ukraine are trying to take it over bloodlessly? I don't think that that's ever been a promise by Ukraine. But either way, it's not looking good. Anyway, going on to the next one, Oleg Tsaryov was subtler. He claimed that Sevastopol residents sung the anthem of Sevastopol, but facetiously quipped that he hoped that this would not be the only Russian response. Familiar calls for strikes on Ukrainian decision-making centers and frustrations with a lack of strike targeting are also circulating. Hardline criticisms of the military and ultra-nationalist total water raids survived Prigozhin's death and Gherkin's arrest. So, there's going to be a lot of this sort of reaction to the activities in Sevastopol. I hope everything's going fine for you guys in the live chat. Sorry, I'm unable to get to you at the moment. Right. I will return to this. So just finally on this Crimean matter, Greg Bagwell says, thoughts here. 1, Russia's hold on Crimea is increasingly untenable. Completely agree there. Ukraine is increasing as Ukraine increases its reach. 2, Russian air defenses are probably more focused on protecting themselves than the infrastructure it is supposed to defend. I talked about this with regard to Russian attacks on Kiev, sometime back with Kinzhal missiles. And I was saying that you have Patriot air defense systems and Nazans being brought into Kiev. And what Russia ended up doing was shooting all of their high-value missiles at the air defense systems. And the air defense systems were almost acting as a decoy away from properly high value targets within Kyiv, right? And so there was a kind of a double whammy. Not only can these air defense systems take out the aerial threats, but they're also sucking away attention from elsewhere onto themselves. And I thought that was an interesting dynamic there. But here, the air defense, he's saying the air defense systems of Russia are not so interested in shooting down stuff that's going to hit other things, but interested in shooting down things that they think are aiming for them. So you've got S-400 systems thinking, right, they're aiming for us. We need to shoot down those threats that are going to take us out, which is an interesting dynamic. So he says the SEED campaign, so that's the suppression of enemy air defense campaign, is starting to pay off. Absolutely. It's just, I think we've really hit an interesting stage in this counteroffensive. And then when you hear that ATACMs are coming online, and I was like, yay, ATACMs. Then I heard that, and we're going to talk about this in some depth later, but I heard that they're going to be the cluster variant. I was like, oh no, because you can't use them against the Kerch Bridge. And then I was like, oh no, now I understand why cluster ones are being given. Oh, hot damn, that's good. So end of air bases. Air bases are, it's going to be open season on Russian air bases in occupied territory. And man, that's helicopters not being able to be stored within occupied territories. That's huge. But we get onto that. I don't want to jump the gun. I've already jumped the gun. Right, let's go on to general strikes. A move away from Sevastopol. And I can now welcome awesome team member and legend in his own underwear, Matt Bishop. Matt, thank you. I can now have a cup of tea.
No, I'm having my cup of tea tonight. I'm not allowed to drink. So. Hi everyone. I had two notes. I was hiding, eating my dinner, watching the beginning of the stream, and Robert wanted to know if that's a Leeds University top you have on.
It is indeed the University of Leeds. You know, all great human beings attended. I mean, this is an old T-shirt, right? But it's not as old as some of my T-shirts. God, I've got band T-shirts going back to 1994 and 1995 that I've still got in my drawers. But yes, it is. It is. My time at Leeds University in the late 90s was awesome.
And ex-Penguin 95 suggested you start calling it Sevastopol.
Nice. I'm sure there are going to be some memes about the devastation that's taking place there. I mean, I cannot underemphasize. No, I cannot overemphasize the other way around. I cannot overemphasize how important what has been taking place in Crimea is. This is huge. I mean, for me, and I'm going to repeat myself as I so often do, which I have to do because people forget 80% of what they learn in 24 hours, and there are new viewers. So the whole of this war, in my opinion, is largely about Crimea. Not entirely, but it's largely about Crimea. So I've explained this before. Crimea has Sevastopol, which is a deep sea warm water port. Deep sea warm water port that is really well protected. So you can moor ships in here, get them on dry dock. This is deep, so you can sail your big ships in here. You don't have to moor them out here. And it doesn't freeze over in winter. So that is, and it has, you know, as I've said, some really big dry dock capability. Otherwise, they have to use Novorossiysk, but this is not a deep water port. It's a shallow port. And so, as you can see from this image, you have to moor stuff out there. They don't have dry docks for their naval ships. This is basically a cargo port, not a military port. It was due to get some upgrades to it, but then they annexed Crimea and they didn't do the upgrades as far as I know. So Novorossiysk is not nearly comparable to Sevastopol. And Sevastopol is bloody important because it gives the Russian, if they have a land bridge, and this is why the Kerch Bridge is so important, because it gives them access to Sevastopol. But ideally, they'd have a land bridge down to Crimea, and that gives their navy access from Russia through the Bosphorus Straits into the Mediterranean, And from the Mediterranean into the, you can go down the Suez Canal and have access to the Middle East and that part of the globe. Or you can come out of the Straits of Gibraltar. I used to live there, fun fact. Not in the Straits, in Gibraltar. And you've got access to the Atlantic. So the importance of Crimea is massive for the Russian Navy. This is, again, I'll repeat myself, the only reason in my books, and I was speaking to a naval friend who was telling me exactly this, the only reason Russia are supporting the Assad regime in Syria is because they get access to a port in the Mediterranean. Otherwise, they wouldn't give a monkeys about Syria, right? They are on Assad's side because they get a strategic position in the Mediterranean. So both Sevastopol and Syria offer them influence and power within the Mediterranean, which is obviously massively important globally speaking, but also through the Suez Canal. Otherwise, they have to use winter ports that freeze over. I know there's one port in the north that doesn't, that I think must have water circulation that doesn't, but it's frozen right outside it. It's just a big problem. Or they have to go from Vladivostok on the eastern coast of Russia, which again, not a warm water port either. So that's the significance of Crimea. And then, sorry, I know a lot of talking, Matt, but then when you have what's going on in Crimea and you hear that they've pulled out all their submarines from Sevastopol and moved them to Novorossiysk, and they're pulling out all their ships now from Sevastopol and moving into Novorossiysk, you realize that just the last few weeks has rendered Crimea strategically impotent for the Russians. And that's the whole point they're doing this war. This is how significant the last few weeks has been. And I think this is a massive turning point. I think that is more important than what is going on in Robotyne and along the front line in Zaporizhia. And bear in mind that the commander of the Russian forces here has just been taken out of action in the strikes on Sevastopol. What are your opinions on that, mate?
I'd say, first of all, just plain simply, definitely. I think, I honestly think the last 3 months has just been about keeping the Russians busy while Ukraine gets itself ready for a big push. My personal belief is you got about 3 more days before a big push comes. Give themselves a good solid week, and I think there's just going to be a huge armored charge punching straight through. I think they're close enough to be able to pull it off now. So, that's my opinion.
As I said today, there's talk that from the Ukrainians themselves have claimed that there's a breakthrough in Verbove, and if that is the case, then it could be what you're talking about. I don't know. I was saying this week on my frontline updates that Velika Novosibirsk has been so quiet that there are some rumors that they've moved their troops from there down to here, and that would support your assessment as well.
Yeah, and look, they've been getting pressure from NATO to say do a big punching move. I think Ukraine's put themselves in a position where they can now. In the beginning, of course, they couldn't. They didn't have air superiority or anything. Huge minefields. It takes a lot of effort to clear that. Had they done the NATO doctrine in the beginning, they would have been just absolutely devastated. But now I think they're in a position where they could do it. There's still going to be a lot of losses. Really sadly, a lot of people are going to pay.
Yeah, we'll come on to that. There's been a fascinating interview with Budanov that is it's just a diamond interview that's really worth looking at, and that's in the drive. So we're going to go through that, and he talks about how they are taking like naturally when you go on the offensive, you end up taking losses. So we are taking higher losses. The Ukrainians, he says, are taking higher losses, but we're still not taking as high losses as the Russians, and we're on the offense. So that's what he says. Anyway, but can I just say, Jerome JR said, mate, you need to refresh a map. He's worked on the map while I've been faffing around. What a legend. So now we've got up-to-date pins as well. I mean,
absolutely amazing.
He's awesome. So we can see that they're, according to Deep State maps, I wasn't going to do a frontline update, but just let's dip into this a little bit. Deep State maps show some gains in these very key areas. I'd be interested to see what Andrew Perpetua says over the next 24, 48 hours to reflect, what is going on here from his point of view, but certainly looks like gains being made there. And then if we come out, and bearing in mind, I haven't really looked into the details of why there are gains around here. I do know about this actually. So Novobakhmativka, there are gains around there. This was a heavily mined area that the Russians took. They took it all the way up to this railway line, and they really mined it heavily. And then Andrew Perpetua last night was talking about how the Russians are shelling Ukrainians here, which is kind of really interesting because that means that they've kind of negotiated themselves across those minefields. And he's long said, he said for the last month or so, that he thinks Novobakhmativka is quite weak, and this is easy pickings for the Ukrainians. And if that is indeed the case, like, that's a good analysis from good prediction from Andrew Perpetua. So that's really significant. That's north of Avdiivka. But yeah, so it's good news for the Ukrainians there. And then around Klishchivka, a couple of gains. This is the area of land I've been talking about for some time, which is Andrew Perpetua saying, I'm not sure if this was controlled by the Russians. This is this part of the land to the west of the railway line, and it appears they're not in control of that now, and that the Russians have been pushed back. Interestingly, Surrey Maps actually said that first, although they have them having a tree line and some ground there. So again, in Klishchivka, some success or south of Bakhmut, success for the Ukrainians too. That's my frontline update really for today, but we will be dipping back into this, of course. Do you have anything to add there?
No, I was just going to mention that Mark gave you, is it $70 Canadian?
What a legend. I'm just going to
Just floored.
look at some of this. So first of all, thank you so much to Celestial Veggie, who is up there in the heavens, being a responsible eater. So thank you. That's really cool. Really appreciate that. And Mark, who I'm going to get on for a live stream, and hopefully you can join us in as well,
Excellent.
Matt.
Yeah,
And we'll have there's a number of people who said, yeah, I'm up for that. We've got Pierre Dupont. I might do a separate one with Pierre Dupont, who is actually in Ukraine at the moment, and I might do one with him and his boss, who's doing volunteer work out there. So that might turn out to be a separate one. But people who have connections to Ukraine, I'm going to be having like a panel discussion, just a kind of community one. Hopefully get to know some of you guys. Hello from another lucky man married to a beautiful Ukrainian lady. Have some weekend wine on us, Jonathan. Cheers. Thank you, Mark. So Bishku, that's really cool. And he's obviously talking to you there, because I'm not married to a Ukrainian woman. I mean, she's beautiful. She's just
nice save.
Just from down the road, just from Gosport, and that's not so exotic. Anyway, no, thanks, Mark. Really appreciate that. Right. So going on to where I was, so that was it. I was talking about strikes. Goodness me, it's going to be a long video. No, it won't. Right. Okay. The Ukrainian Air Force has confirmed it's shot down 14. So this is last night. 14 out of 15 Shahed drones launched towards Ukraine. That's a good interception rate. Of course, one would have got through, and the other 14 can still do damage as they fall to the ground. Some of them because they've got explosives on board, you don't always blow up the explosives in midair. So sometimes you hit the wings and then they fall to the ground and then explode. So they still do cause problems. And the issue there is that they cause problems invariably to non-military targets. Not that they were going to be striking at military targets anyway, but if they're going to fall to the ground, then they're going to have a higher likelihood of having law of unintended consequences, collateral damage that it was not initially intended. So that's great, but it still doesn't mean it's nice for the Ukrainians. Here we have more explosions and smoke reported in Sevastopol. So this is today. This is this morning. And this one is seen in Isukyanaya Balka. Again, I think we're going to see this as an ongoing occurrence day in, day out. The Ukrainians know they can do it now. And unless the Russians bring in all their S-400s and S-300s that they've got, then this will continue. And then if they do bring in all those air defenses, then the Ukraine know that those air defenses aren't wherever they were, and that opens up opportunities elsewhere. So this is that idea of a blanket that's not quite big enough for your bed, and you pull it into one area of the bed and it uncovers the other area. So then Ukraine will attack there. So you pull the blanket over to that edge, and it reveals an area of the bed over here that's now available to be attacked. Not that the Ukrainians are attacking my bed or anything. Any thoughts on that, Matt? And thanks, Mitch. Mitch is such a ledge. He's a good old Canadian supporter. Some additional sanctions relief. Thanks, JP. So you know what? I do get sanctioned by. I had 4 out of my last 6 videos were demonetized by YouTube. And like one of them, I was just talking about geopolitical stuff. I'm like, I'm not showing anything that's blown up. Just oh well, but that's life. That's the nature of the beast. So thanks, Mitch, by the way. Really appreciate that. Sorry, did you want to say anything, Matt?
No, I'm just keeping an eye on chat. So yeah, I'll just ask everyone to excuse me when I'm turning my head like this. It's because unfortunately the chat, which I'm trying to keep an eye on at the same time, is on the second monitor, and they're big curved monitors and all that rubbish. So I
Nice.
almost get whiplash looking at the chat to make sure everything's okay in it. So yeah.
Good on you. Well, let me
Apologies.
know if there's anything anything poignant,
Mhm.
pertinent. Right. So just to continue, here we have another strike by Ukraine. May have come in the small town of Samokvalove in Crimea. So Crimea being hit again is reported by Crimea Wind, Telegram channel, that this is a military truck repair center quite near. Oh, why do you do this to me? Bakhchisarai. So there you go. So again, Crimea getting hammered, and this, I'm sure, as I've said, will continue. Now, classic Russian propaganda, says Dmitry from War Translated. Solovyev, as referencing some Turks, says that Russia launched a massive air raid on the Ukrainian Kremenchuk airfield and destroyed all the Su-24M bombers used to attack for the attack on Sevastopol today, as well as a whole stockpile of Storm Shadow missiles. In other words, according to the propagandist on Russian TV, we shouldn't see any more Storm Shadows being fired because the entire Su-24M fleet has been taken out, as well as a stockpile of bombs, missiles. So, take that with a salt mine, a Solidar salt mine of salt would be my opinion there. Thanks so much, Borg fella. Don't mind me. I'm just monetizing your stream. Thanks, Borg. He's great on YouTube as well, Borg fella. Thanks. Good meme action. Right. Talking about propaganda and basically lying. The Russians said of a strike last night. So there were explosions in Kazan, which is 1,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian front line. Well, that's significant, right? So either Kazan, right, assuming Kazan's actually been hit by drones, then those drones can either go 1,000 kilometers from Ukraine, or you've got saboteurs deep within Russia. None of those options are good for Russia. So what does Russia say? Well, according to Russian authorities, the explosion in Kazan is due to a jammed engine in the car of a local resident, right? The explosion that alarmed the area in Kazan was an ordinary engine exhaust. A local resident parked his car and his engine jammed. It reached more than 6,000 RPM and there was a bang. Yeah, I'm not sure that really does justice to explaining explosions like this. Is this a car going bang? Like, that's quite. I mean, you can't hear anything there, but oh, sorry, you can't see it.
You can't see it.
Yeah, so you keep me on my toes, mate. So it does that look like a car just going bang with all of these car alarms going off? Unfortunately, you can't hear it, but there's a massive flash
Well,
there.
a car doesn't go bang. It accelerates so fast that it ends up throwing a piston through the block, so it doesn't actually explode when you over rev it. So,
Oh, mate, don't look. I'm a Russian propagandist. Don't come at me with rational
sorry.
evidence. Like, rational evidence is not what we're looking for. We want spurious excuses. Yes, good to know that too.
That's the mechanic in me coming out. That was a long time ago. So, you know.
Good on you. In Kazan, a powerful explosion occurred on the territory of an industrial zone. Citizens report that first a loud rumble was heard. That's that engine just over revving, isn't it? And then a bright flash was seen. That's that piston block thing you were talking about. I'm sure. A fire is visible at the scene. That's the I don't know, the upholstery of the car catching fire. There is thick smoke. What exactly happened is still unknown. Firefighters are working at the scene. So that's that. But as I say, these things are significant because it shows the capability of the Ukrainians in terms of drone reach, or it shows that there really are dangerous saboteurs working deep within Russia on a regular basis. And it's just, a horrible dynamic for the Russians to be in. And then just finally on the strikes here, we've got Jankoy. So just to remind you where Jankoy is, explosions in Jankoy. This is super significant because Jankoy, again, it's been hit for some time now over the length of the war, really. But this is significant because it is a logistics hub to the north of Crimea, and it's where the railway passes through, goes up through Chonhar, and it's also where the road goes up through Krasnoperekopsk and Armyansk. So this is logistically massively important. But there's also an airbase there, I think a helicopter airbase. There's also repair facilities, I think. Lots of because of obviously it's on this logistics kind of crossroads there. It's a useful place to have all kinds of stuff like that. So there are plenty of targets to hit in Jankoy, and it doesn't surprise me at all that that's been targeted today. So really good news if you're pro-Ukrainian there. Thanks, Brian Ivy. Very kind of you. A great supporter of the channel. Actually, I think, did I feature one of his comments yesterday? Or was going to. Anyway, Brian, always a pleasure, never a chore. So now we're going to move on. That strike's done. I don't know. While you do some talking, I'll see if there's anything else to gather from the most recent threads I have from my sources, but we'll do that a bit later. I'm going to move on, unless you've got anything to say, Matt. I'm going to move on to the Budanov interview. Sorry, sometimes words fail me. Okay, exclusive interview with Ukraine's spy boss from his DC hotel room. This is such a nugget rich. This is like getting 5 family meals from KFC in terms of like what this offers. Budanov, obviously take what he says with a pinch of salt because he's an intelligence chief, right? And so his job is to lead people astray or be very careful with what he says, but also to, I guess, say when they've been doing really well to unsettle the Russians as well. So he says here, and I'm going to miss out the first bunch. He says, in answer to the question, do you still believe that Ukraine will retake Crimea this year? So this is pertinent to what we've been talking about. Or will a counteroffensive push on until next year? His response, our counteroffensive operation started at the beginning of summer and is still ongoing. It hasn't stopped. And as you've rightly said, I'm not the commander-in-chief of the General Staff. That is why questions about the tempo or progress of the counteroffensive operation should be addressed to the General Staff. But speaking of Crimea, could you not have missed that since the middle of August, there's been a certain intensification going on with regard to Crimea? And that might indirectly give you a hint about the answer to your question. In other words, we're hammering Crimea, and we might well be in there, seeking to get in there still. But even if we don't get in there, it has the same effect. And this is what I've been saying all along. You don't need to get into Crimea to render it kind of functionally useless for the Russians. I would argue that it's almost there now, if not already there. He goes on to say, so first of all, the fact itself is that we're engaging the military infrastructure and military targets in occupied Crimea and the occupiers' infrastructure. If we're going deeper into strikes against the air defense system, it's more complicated here. First of all, the air defense systems themselves are very costly equipment, and it takes a lot of time to produce those, and Russian flags those systems because all this inventory is currently engaged in fighting against Ukraine and also in protection of Moscow. They've taken away air defenses from everywhere else. That is why, naturally, when we engage in another air defense battalion of the Russian military, they need to think about where they can pull those systems from and where they're able to tolerate less defenses in other places. We go back to the blanket analogy I was saying. That's exactly that. He's saying that the Russians are thinking, well, if we take air defenses from here, that leaves that area weak, but we need to pull them to Ukraine because Ukraine is of such high value. But then that allows somewhere else to be hit. And then just finally on that section, he says the second point is engaging defenses. The second point in engaging defenses is that we're making those holes in the overall air defense coverage. Those holes are exploited for other things. Also, we're depleting their air defense missile stocks because those are not limitless. And from the political standpoint, we're also demonstrating the obvious inability of Russian air defense systems, which respectively makes them less lucrative on the world arms market. I mean, the multifaceted approach to reading success or to evaluating BDA here, battle damage assessment here, is interesting. He's even going as far as to say that, and this is going to affect their arms export going forward, because no one's going to want to buy the Russian air defense systems because they're not performing well enough against the kind of munitions we're sending them. As well as the fact that we're taking out the air defense systems, which then means that they're too thinly spread out across the Russian kind of needs, and also they're really costly to replace. So this is good news for the Ukrainians. What are your thoughts, mate?
So no, I'm putting Trevor in timeout. I'm having fun with Trevor instead. So sorry, I'm every time you ask so far, I'm involved in chat. So
you're jousting with the trolls, and good on you for doing so. Then he says a bit later. So this is talking about strikes on Moscow, and I thought this was really important. Let's put it like this: we've never confirmed attacks on Moscow officially, and I will officially, he says, and he laughs. And I will be keeping that stance. So in other words, they're not officially attacking Moscow, but they are. Like, everyone knows they are, and he laughs at that point. So he knows that you know, so on and so forth. But I can share my opinion about those strikes. All the above mentioned factors clearly coincide with the strikes inside Russia. So when you're talking about needing to take air defense systems away from certain places, then some of those will come from deep within Russia. We already knew right at the beginning of the war that they had taken air defense systems from St. Petersburg area. Not all of them. They'd left St. Petersburg with a couple, but removed them. So if they're doing that around Moscow, then that is important. Especially when we're talking about the obviously decreasing demand for Russian weapons, because when the whole world sees that some drones are attacking Moscow, nobody wants to buy Russian air defense systems any longer. Exactly what we were just saying. And that is a very, very painful for them. And it links back to additional factors which are absent when we're discussing Crimea. One side note, there's completely opposite situation in terms of demand on weapon systems. There's a very high demand on Ukrainian drones now. We can't sell those now because all of them are used for warfighting. But after the war ends, this will have a lot of meaning. I saw a Russian, I was speaking yesterday about how Ukraine will need to strategically plan their economy after the end of the war, such that they become world leaders in certain sectors. And that will then mean that you can attract employees and attract inward investment from outside of Ukraine. And I had a Russian troll arguing yesterday on one of the threads that after the war, if Ukraine join the EU, they'll have a massive brain drain and all their people will flood out from Ukraine into the EU. And that is a possibility.
Can I comment on that one?
Yeah.
Comment on that one? Ukrainians have been allowed to go through the EU for quite a while now. In fact, going back 10 years, they used to go work in the EU a lot and return to Ukraine. And I'm going to get this fact wrong, but it was something like over half of the mobile applications were being developed in Ukraine before the war started. So half the mobile apps in the world. So Ukraine is full of engineers, full of programmers already, and they're chronically underpaid. And I can sit there and say you can have a programmer for $1,000 a month. In Ukraine, whereas that's income's gone right up compared to what it was 10 years ago. Whereas if I'm employing a programmer in, I'll say Australia, you're looking at 100,000 Australians, that's 70,000 US a year. Many years ago in the UK, I was offered £60,000 as a starting wage, and that's going almost 20 years back. So that gives you some idea of the cost of programmers in Ukraine. You're picking them up for $1,000 a month. So they've got.
Which is so. On the one hand, you could say, well, then they'd all want to leave and go to other EU places. But then on the other hand, you've got investment coming from the EU saying, well, if we set up in Ukraine, we've got a great pool of programmers that are relatively cheap, and actually that's the best place for us to set up. And then of course the wages would go up in Ukraine and so on and so forth. I think that you would actually be able to start attracting people to Ukraine. So that's what I was arguing against.
But that's why we went there originally all that time ago. Or once we'd got there, it was, hang on around, looking around, there's huge business opportunities in Ukraine. You got huge companies. a lot of okay, the one my wife works for, Canopy, they've been in Ukraine for 7 years. They do all the TV stuff for libraries and things like that, and that's been there, I think, about 7 years, maybe 8 years. So a lot of businesses have already put a lot of money into Ukraine, and I think it's just going to grow as those people slow to pick up are going to realize that it's a country of highly intelligent people, and I think
Yeah,
that's actually one of the reasons Russia wants it so much.
yeah,
You know,
good point. A great input as well. Thanks. In fact, AJ Simo says for JP's beer
Mm,
and wine fund, thank you very much. It is a fund that is consistently drawn from. Though I
mm,
think Matt deserves a few beers out of it too. You damn straight, mate.
no.
And I'll tell you what, Matt. When we go and have our jaunt into Ukraine, you've definitely got some beers on me.
Oh,
Like
sounds good.
now, speaking about the strikes deep into Russia, including Moscow, that are conducted by someone, there is a social side of it, says Budanov, because now the Russian population, and especially large Russian businesses, really start to feel the impact of war. Because before that, it was just a war going on TV. Yes, it did have some financial impact on big players, but smaller ones weren't even touched. But demonstrative strikes, such as strikes against Moscow City, the skyscraper district of Moscow, demonstrates to everyone that now it touches upon them. I mean, it's really clear communication there, messaging there from Budanov. He continues, besides that, it undermines the belief in the population in all-powerful Russian regime that it's the strongest one in the world. They start asking those logical questions like, where's our air defenses that are supposed to protect us? And they start blaming their authorities for that, for stealing all the money. The next aspect is strikes against critical military infrastructure. It includes oil refineries and that supply fuel to the warfighting. I mean, that's something we have seen already within Russia, as well as the factories and plants that produce components for military equipment. So that's the overall picture. I wonder whether I mean, the thing is with I think at least most of the military production facilities, as in the tank making, the IFV making facilities, they are very far away. They are strategically placed in very safe parts of Russia, very much to the north and to the east. And so therefore, they're generally out of the way of easy strikes for the Ukrainians. But, they would be, I'm sure the Ukrainians have thought long and hard about what strategic targets they can take out within Russia, militarily speaking. And then just the last, I know I've spent a lot of time on Budanov here, but it is so important what he says. He says this is about the losses around Malatok Machka. So if you remember in at the beginning of the counteroffensive in this Robotina area, north of there was Malatok Machka, and we saw all those Bradleys and Leopards being taken out in the fields, and it was all, oh my goodness, this is terrible. And so the Ukrainians then changed their approach, they changed their tactics up and moved on to doing this more attritional positional fighting and distance ordnance usage. So he says actually there wasn't that much material that was destroyed. There was a lot of damaged material, and by now it's repaired. The number of those that were destroyed was not that high, but it's this very simple example. It's the very example we just talked about. So if we just deploy some battalion tank group into the battlefield somewhere, just as long as it gets under the range of artillery, it will get hit. He says, sorry, my mouse appears to have had kittens. I will share two other examples on the enemy side. Similar situations could be observed during Russian attempts to attack Vuhledar last winter. The same thing happened. They went on attacking combat convoys, and there were dozens of pieces of equipment that just didn't get through. And by the way, what is peculiar about that specific operation was that it was commanded personally by General Gerasimov. And when all that equipment was destroyed, he blamed everyone around him and just left the front line. I'll provide you with one more different example. It's about how Wagner units advanced. When they did manage to take Bakhmut on May the 21st, they were not using armored vehicles. They were only using artillery support to infantry actions on foot. So practically, they were just using infantry. So the interviewer says, that's expensive in terms of lives, right? And are you able to talk about the toll these kinds of attacks are taking on Ukrainian forces? And he says, regretfully, I don't possess the precise number of our casualties, but it is completely logical that all of our casualties, both killed in action and wounded in action, went up as we shifted to offensive operations if we compare those with the previous periods. But there is still this very interesting peculiarity that even though we're on the offensive, our numbers of casualties are still lower than on the enemy side, who are in defense. So I thought that was, and I did mention that earlier, that was really interesting. There's just one final little quote, which I thought was a drop mic kind of moment. This is it's talking about just what's going on in the Melitopol, Berdyansk directions. It says, for example, the Russians recently redeployed their only reserve force, the 25th Army, which was just recently raised and hasn't completed its creation. Now it's redeployed to roughly the north of Bakhmut. Actually, not the Melitopol direction, obviously. That's the place where it's going to be buried. It's like, oh, ouch, that hurts. So, but yeah, really interesting interview there with Budanov, and so much more to glean out of that. I'll probably return to that. Do you have anything else to mention, mate?
Look, I'm just want to point out that it really seems to me that Ukraine's playing chess. You know, you look at this whole war. Russia's come in as this huge aggressive force. Ukraine's done this whole war by using its brain. It's been on the back foot this whole time, and now it's slowly pushing. But just every little approach that they're doing, they're really thinking things through every step of the way. So whether it's getting Russian air defenses to move over to Moscow, or reposition the troops where Ukraine wants them, and that's some of the questions that you got to ask looking at the battlefield at the moment is, why does Ukraine want Russian troops to be actually concentrated in certain positions, because they've got Russians reacting to them, and it's not Ukraine reacting to Russia anymore.
Yeah, I absolutely. Where was it? I was just going to talk to this idea. I can't find it. Someone sent it to me yesterday. Anyway, I'll look for that again. Sorry, I'm talking nonsense here. So what was I going to say? You're absolutely right. So the game of chess is this move back from sending in lots of equipment, which is what the Americans and NATO have said. You need to punch through big time, and you will take some losses, but it'll be worth it, and you're getting behind the enemy. Ukraine sort of tried to do that at the beginning and then lost loads because of the minefields. So then they said, right, we need to, and also artillery working on them at the same time, and ATGMs. It's like the triple whammy. So they said, right, we can't do that until we sort out the fortifications and minefields and the obstacles, that we sort out Russian artillery capability and capacity. And once we do that, then we can talk about advancing in the way that NATO stipulate. So then they just sat back. They didn't just sit back. Obviously, it's been intense across the front line. But they have basically relied for now 3 months on Ukrainian HIMARS and other multiple launch rocket systems, and the ranged artillery that they have that outranges the Russian artillery quite considerably. And they have an asymmetrical advantage in terms of precision guidance on a lot of their munitions, both from the shells that they use, like the Excalibur shells, but also in the way that they're getting spotted. All these advantages have meant that the Russians have been severely attrited to the point. So it's stretch, starve, and strike, to the point where now the Ukrainians are ready to strike. So that's that game of chess. You get all your ducks in a row on the chessboard. Ill-advised to use ducks to play chess, by the way. You get them all in a row, and you go, right, now's the time to hit. And I think we're getting very close to that. As you said, you're expecting it in 3 to 4 days. So you might see a strike, but they weren't ready at that point, because actually the fields were so densely mined to a point that they hadn't realized that it was that problematic. And of course, you've got the trenches to deal with as well. And what I was going to say, actually, this also pertains to the Bakhmut offensive. And I don't even remember, Matt, but I was talking for a long time about how Bakhmut was a real success for the Ukrainians. Lots of pro-Russian voices were saying, this is an absolute meat grinder. Ukrainians are getting hammered. And I was saying, no, the ratios this is not only fixing Russian forces here and a lot of Russian forces, but it's grinding their troops down. Not so much their equipment. They didn't use that much equipment, but their troops to a massive degree. And it's become this big thing that the Russians feel they can't lose it. And so they fix even more troops in. And so now there was what I was looking for was a video someone sent me, which is actually a Daily Mail video, like a 10-minute video talking about how Bakhmut has been a success. How now you're starting to see the success.
It was a massive success. I remember right back at the beginning when people were saying Ukraine should get out. It was like, no. Russia's focusing on that. The main point for me that it's always been when you talk about Bakhmut or anything like that is it's about getting Russia just to destroy one place and not 100 villages, because that's containing a whole pile of people's homes and lives and whatnot. And if Russia was, and Russia was able at that point to, pressure on put pressure on a lot of points, but it chose not to. It chose to concentrate. And when you look at the actual ground around Bakhmut, it favored Ukraine. It was, it wasn't about the city of Bakhmut. It was about getting Russia to concentrate on it. And now Russia's trapped. Politically, they can't lose it. And so now it's even diverting troops from being able to defend against Ukraine's southern push. And if Ukraine opens up another front, Russia's going to be completely screwed because they've got all troops now in two places.
Absolutely. I'm still trying to find that video. There was a video, but anyway, the point is that was a great success for the Ukrainians, and it continues to pay dividends, I think, in having Russian forces be severely attrited and having them still fixed in that area. And not be able to, use those forces elsewhere. Yeah, I just think Bakhmut was part of that chess game, and I think it was. I think history will look back on that as being actually a good decision for the Ukrainians to have made. And I know there are lots of analysts, people like Michael Kaufman and other top analysts that were really critical of Ukraine's use of Bakhmut in that way. And obviously, when you go and speak to the troops on the line there, I did a segment on this saying it's really difficult when you see the reality of making these utilitarian decisions, right? So if you're going to say we are going to sacrifice some units in the Bakhmut area to fix Russian forces and to attrit them, but when you go and like Michael Kaufman went to the Bakhmut area, was talking to these people who weren't quite trained enough, who didn't quite have enough equipment that they thought, and you understand that that's horrible, that's horrible, but actually that's war, and they were being used literally in a utilitarian manner. They were being used for a greater good, right? And the greater good was, the gains that you're starting to see come to fruition in terms of how it played out in Bakhmut. But it's difficult when you think that actually you're trading human lives for those gains. But that is the nature of warfare. And it's easy for me to say that sitting on my ass on the south coast of the UK, looking at a computer screen. Like, I'm not one of those human beings. But that's the reality of war, and it is horrible. But I think history will look kindly on that decision in terms of how successful it was. Anyway, that's my tuppence. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. Anton Garaschenko, who, just to remind you, if you don't know who he is, advisor to the Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine. He says Russia's GLONASS system, so this is their alternative to the GPS system. By the way, I meant to say thank you publicly to Paddy. Good stuff, Paddy. Really appreciate that. Here's your monthly TV license for you. Appreciate that one. Thanks, mates. So GLONASS is their equivalent to GPS, and they use it for a lot of their weaponry. And he says it's on the verge of technological collapse, outdated, needs an upgrade, and has poor accuracy to use smart weapons. The Russian geopositioning system GLONASS, which has been developed since the early 2000s, promising to create high quality and cheap alternative to the American GPS, has found itself on the verge of technological collapse. The satellites placed in orbit are living out their last years. I've done 2 segments on Russian satellites, but it's going back a long time now, and how outdated they are. that they can't replace them. They have poor resolution when you're talking about like optical satellites and whatnot. It's just their satellite situation is a massive disadvantage to the Russians, and the fact that that Ukraine can use NATO's best satellite capabilities is bloody huge, right? And this is why France, like, kudos to France. People don't, I think, realize that they've allowed, I think, Ukraine access to they're one of the few nations that have really good military satellites capability, as far as I understand it. And this is not something that you see like being announced in the news. Oh, we're going to give 10 tanks. Like, France don't really announce their military assistance anyway. But people have been slagging off France, but there are things that France do under the radar that others aren't so cognizant of. And one of the things is providing military satellite capability, and that is huge. Like, intelligence is massive. It enables you to acquire targets in real time. It enables you to communicate effectively. It enables you to do all these things that the Russians are struggling to do, especially since their own indigenous system is on, the claim is here, on the verge of technological collapse. Satellites placed in orbit and living out their last years, and the sanctions imposed on the Russian space industry are preventing the launch of new ones. At the moment, more than half of the satellites are obsolete, while others are nearing the end of their useful life. Military expert Pavel Luzin, a senior research fellow at the Jamestown Foundation, told Bloomberg. He was a guy, he's written a whole bunch of papers that I referred to in my video on satellites. So if you search either in ATP Geopolitics, this channel, for satellites, you should find that. It's all of what I said is still relevant now, or it might have been on my other channel, a Tippling Philosopher. But go and check that satellite video out, because I think it's really, really important still. To keep the system operational, 20 new satellites will need to be put into orbit by the end of the decade. But because of the shortage of needed electronics, Russia can produce and send into space only 1 to 2 satellites a year, Luzin said. So think of how many satellites Starlink send up, how Elon Musk, right, and SpaceX, they're sending satellites up on a weekly basis. Russia can only do 1 or 2 a year. That's that asymmetry that's so important. Their biggest problem is how to save the system itself. I think that's huge. Do you have anything to say about that, Matt?
Crap, you keep throwing these things to me. No, I am really not up to date on satellite systems.
Fair enough. That's cool. That's cool. Thank you to Louise. Love these live streams. I love doing them as well, because I get to interact with you guys, and it makes it. I loved going on a live stream before it went live and seeing the people putting in their early comments in the live stream, in the live chat, and going, yeah, I know them, I know them, I know them. Oh, it's the team getting together. It's just lovely. Anyway, thanks, Louise. You great support. All the way from Australia. I love people, most people from Australia, some of them, honestly. Australians.
All of them.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Matt. Oh, yeah. Right. So back to Crimea, because we haven't talked enough about Crimea. The Ministry of Disinformation now, says Tim White, now says no one died in the attack on the Black Sea Fleet HQ, but 1 serviceman is missing. Meanwhile, the occupiers report, and this is the part that I want to point out, because I said that bit before. Meanwhile, the occupiers report an unprecedented cyber attack on local internet providers, causing huge internet problems across the peninsula. That's interesting that Ukraine are taking the cyber warfare to Russia, apparently, there. So I thought that was an interesting little nugget. Here we have a British Challenger 2 of the 82nd ODS HBR in the direction of Zaporizhia. So Challenger 2's maybe getting close to some action that might go towards what you were saying, Matt, in that we might see a push in the next 3 to 4 days. Mm-hmm. And then there was this. This isn't to do
apparently,
with...
Sorry, someone said that the 128th also was moving to the Kherson region. I'm sorry, I can't remember who said it in chat.
To the Kherson region?
The 129th. Yeah, Steve asked you.
I might pull up deep state maps in a minute to show you something about Kherson, which I hadn't told you about previously. I'll just do this and I'll go back to that. So PSL11 says, that's it. That's our warehouse. Well, he doesn't say, this is a quote from a Russian here. That's our warehouse effed here. So footage appeared of Azerbaijani army. Oh, goodness me. striking Russian peacekeepers. So we saw a peacekeeper car was blown up the other day, which had a really high value Russian officer in. It appears that Azerbaijan don't particularly care for Russian peacekeepers here, and Armenia have burnt their bridges with Russia with embracing the West and the US. And so Russia have really lost out here in terms of influence. Anyway, if they're having their own military stuff targeted openly by the Azerbaijanis, if indeed that is true, then I think that's really significant. Anyway, to go back to what
Hang on, someone. Sorry, Thierry was actually saying, could you just inform ATP that his
wrong.
first info about spy ship from 2017? Does that make
Oh,
sense? Sorry.
bugger. Yeah, okay. Thanks for that.
Yep.
I take back all of thy claims about that. Do you know what? I remember that I reported that beginning of this year, the war. Right, take back what I said about that spy ship. That is absolutely right. That apparently was from. Oh, that's terrible. But I really like Thierry for pointing that out. And what's even more embarrassing is that I've reported that before, and I remember now. And I'm fairly sure I got the dating wrong when I reported it then too. So that's twice. Oh dear. Three. Yeah. Once bitten, twice shy. Well, evidently not. Okay, thanks for that. Thanks for that corrective. Ignore that spy ship bit at the beginning of the video. Oh well. So Kherson, no, that's not. Oh well, that's really important. Thanks, Thierry. We have some activity taking place in Kherson that I have not reported, and that's because I don't use Deep State Map to inform my mapping in all of the map because it would just be too many lines. I do Deep State Map around, as you can see, the yellow line around Robotina and around Avdiivka and around Bakhmut. But actually, they have shown some significant changes over the last few days, and I'm going to show you that on their map here. So this is Deep State Map, and we're going to go to Kherson, and we're going to go to Oleshki, which is here. Right, let's go to their change of days, and you'll see that. Oh, has it gone back? Ah, well, okay. Glad I didn't talk about that then. It's both the Russians have been pushed back, and it appears because someone was saying you've not talked about Deep State Map changing, and the Russians being pushed back near Leshki, and lo and behold, last 24 hours it's gone back. So actually, don't know what to make of that. What I was going to say is there appears to be activity taking place around Kherson. We don't always hear about it, and if there are other units being relocated, redeployed to Kherson, then that could indicate that we might see some activity taking place here. That still could indicate that, because if there has been a little to and fro about territory in this area, then perhaps we are going to see some activity there. But interesting that actually that's now just changed back to Russian control. So in that way, we can go back to talking about military aid. Is there anything you wanted to say at all?
Nope, I'm just, all around Kherson is just about keeping the Russian troops there. It's not a feasible military attack point, really, is it? So
Yeah, I mean, some people. Oops, I've got rid of everything. Some people
yeah,
say
I've gone
it's
big.
some. Yeah. Everyone likes. Yeah, everyone likes to see our faces closer. Yeah, so I think I don't know what to think about that. I kind of slide all over the shop with regard to what's going on in Kherson and what the intentions are, because if it was fixing, then the Russians have actually moved a lot of their forces away from Kherson and really weakened that front and moved them to Zaporizhia. So I don't think the Ukrainians are successfully fixing people there. But then if they're looking like there could be a threat coming across, whether they are or not, then that might fix them. And there have been
Uh,
these kind of probing attacks.
Yeah, they're still keeping the Russians on their toes, but I think I was having a discussion. I'm not sure if it was in your chat or damn, I can't think of the Australian Willie who does it. But we were
Willie
actually breaking.
Ran.
Yeah, we were breaking. Or I was arguing the fact that come winter, it's going to be possible to cross. And I was having a conversation with another person. They were saying, no, it's going to go all muddy and all the rest of it. I'm like, no, actually have a look at the rainfall. throughout the whole southern corridor there, you're only talking 50 mil for a month.
Yeah, this is such a good
You
point.
know.
I've been meaning to say this all week. Every
Oh,
single day on my frontline update, I've been meaning to say this. Right. The soil around here, right, as far as I understand it, this used to be a dust bowl. And the only
yep.
reason it's not a dust bowl anymore is because of the irrigation that comes down from the Dnipro River. And as soon as they started irrigating it, it became usable farmland. But this was one of the big worries about the Novikakhovka Dam being blown up, is that you then struggle to irrigate this entire land and it becomes a dust bowl again. And Ukraine loses a huge amount of its agricultural capability. Now, what this also means is that this isn't a sort of muddy terrain that you get up here, right? When it rains up here, you ain't going to move a tracked vehicle at all. I mean, it's going to get stuck. When you've got serious like Rasputitsa or the Ukrainian equivalent word, which I can't remember. Now, that is less likely to take place down here where there's all this activity. So there are some people claiming that the counteroffensive should be able to go on for much longer during the autumn months because the soil around here is much more sandy. And and that's that. And the rainfall is far less, and that is why it has traditionally been a dust bowl. And I think that has some serious implications for the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Still, massive. Thanks for reminding me about that, Mark. So massive thanks to Mark Gould here. Really generous support of the channel. Thank you so very much.
I'm just waiting. I'm just reading the little whiskey shop here gave you 20 quid, but I haven't seen him say that he's sending me a bottle of Macallan.
So Little Whiskey Shop, a great live feed as ever. Thanks as well, Little Whiskey Shop. I had a chat with him on before offline. Gave me an excuse. I think I have. Anyway, thank you. Gave me an excuse to sit down with a coffee. Happy to have a happy birthday drama on me. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. I'm not a huge spirits drinker, but I do like a decent red wine. So if you don't mind, maybe I'll push Matt. He likes his whiskey, so I'll push a whiskey Matt's way. You got a bottle on me, mate. So now we're going to get on to a really big topic, and this is going to be chunky. So, ATACMS. Massive news yesterday. I did a live, I did a breaking update news piece, and it's huge. So let's talk about this. Budanov's correct, says Trentilenko. It depends on which of the many ATACMS variants are delivered. Sending time-expired cluster munitions Block 1 of Block 1A ATACMS won't be useful in destroying concrete bridges. True. I got a little bit, not so sure about ATACMS last night after I initially heard the news, because I heard it was going to be cluster variants. And as I said earlier, now I've changed my mind. I think cluster variants are the perfect thing to send Ukraine. They're not going to destroy the Kerch Bridge, but I don't, other things can do that. And it's not as important as I think what they can do with these cluster variants. Anyway, Biden announced Zelensky has promised Zelensky a small shipment of ATACMS, who knows how many. Meanwhile, the Washington Post reported that Biden administration was close to a decision to provide Ukraine with a modification of ATACMS with a cluster warhead. Okay, let's have a look at that. So this is the Washington Post piece. They say the cluster-armed ATACMS with a range of between 45 and 190 miles, so that's going to be up to sort of 300 kilometers, depending on the version chosen, but it might be less than that, would allow Ukraine to strike command posts, ammunition stores, and logistics routes far behind Russian front lines and dug-in defenses. Ukraine, with backing from a number of US lawmakers, has been asking since last year for ATACMS. So before we go into the details, what are your thoughts on having the cluster variant, Matt?
Oh, geez, here we go. Look, the ATACMS in itself, I don't think is going to make too much of a change on the battlefield. I think Ukrainian missiles are already doing that. Their indigenous Neptune starting to get there. But I think it actually shows that the US is ramping up a bit more to show that they're going to commit just that little bit more.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to disagree with you. So I'm going to disagree and
Yep.
say I think they will make a difference, and we're going to talk about why they're going to make a difference. So, but the cluster-armed version of ATACMS are more plentiful than those topped with a single or unitary warhead. So that's interesting, and are no
Yep.
longer considered a frontline US weapon. That's interesting. So what someone was telling me the other day about why ATACMS might not have been in one of the threads, what might not have been given initially is because of the idea that the US, as part of their doctrine, has to have the ability to have two fronts going on at one time and be able to succeed with both, right? And if they were to go to war themselves with China, they would, at the sort of stuff that the US has given Ukraine already, would not affect the success in a frontline battle with like China. However, if they did have ATACMS, if they did give the ATACMS to Ukraine, they don't have enough of those to be able to operate on the front line with China. However, they've got the new precision guided capabilities coming online, and I think when you then have outdated cluster munitions variants that they are less likely to use, not the unitary warhead versions, then they are able to give these. Now, I'm going to talk about how these will be advantageous as well. From an estimated original production 2,500, some from the early 1990s, an unknown number were later refitted with unitary warheads, according to the fiscal year 2018 Defense Department publication. But many of the cluster variant remain in stockpiles. Consideration of the cluster warhead ATACMS was first reported by Reuters. So, okay, we're going to now pop in to listen to a bit of the Andrew Perpetua live stream. Before we do that, let's just go and see what Rob Lee says regarding the ATACMS. And this comes from the article we've just been looking at, by the way. Regarding ATACMS, Budanov says, so let's wait for the official announcements to be made. But I can say conditionally that if it's 100 missiles, this won't change the situation. And I think that that's possibly true. I'd hope it is more than 100, but still, I'll tell you what, 100 can do some awesome work. And here's for why. So listen to, I don't know who it is, one of the experts Andrew Perpetua had on his live stream last night.
JP, can I just be 2 minutes?
Oh, sorry. And can you hear that? First of all, Matt, could you hear that?
No, I didn't hear anything then.
You didn't hear anything from that playing?
I didn't know. I was speaking at the same time.
Okay, so, okay, carry on.
I was just saying, can I just run off for 2 minutes?
Yes.
Yep. All right.
Okay. So, first of all, can people? You didn't hear it because I hadn't switched the tab. Right. This is this tab that we're going to watch now. So, unfortunately, Matt's going to miss this because this is the key part to kind of answering his not issue, but his claim that it's not going to change the battlefield, I guess, or the situation too much. I think this is significant. Right. Can you hear this?
Ukraine is likely going to receive a, quote, limited number of ATACMS tactical ballistic missile systems from the United States, with a possibility of additional future deliveries, somewhere down the line. The reporting seems to indicate that Ukraine will probably be receiving M39A1s, which have a 300-kilometer range, GPS and inertial guidance, and dispense a payload of approximately 300 general-purpose submunitions. So this is really the effect this will have on the battlefield and on operations is really strongly dependent on how many they receive. But this is a markedly different capability than what Storm Shadow and Scalp EG have previously offered. This gives Ukraine. ATACMS will give Ukraine the ability to do two things: to prosecute time-sensitive targets. Time-sensitive target is either a target that decays quickly because it's highly mobile, or a target that is such an enormous threat to your own operations that it must be prosecuted immediately. And it also will enable them to prosecute area targets, airfields, heliports, dispersed SAM batteries. All of those things will now be on the table in a way that they just never were beforehand. And again, the actual magnitude of effects on the battlefield that Ukraine can achieve is, again, strongly dependent on how many they get. But if they get, say, 100 over a month or so, that would be rather significant.
I can't tell you actually how sadly excited I was about the prospect of getting even 100 ATACMs, because 2 ATACMs could take out, because the number of submunitions in these ATACMs, like, was it 300 submunitions spreading over 130-meter radius? Like, if you're talking, the problem, we have heard that the Russians can very safely park their helicopters at Berdyansk and at Saki Air Base or whatever. They can park their helicopters because ain't nothing going to touch them. So you're never going to send a single Storm Shadow missile into an airbase to take out one helicopter, right? It's not a good use of those missiles, and so therefore they haven't been doing that, or at least you could argue. But when you've got like 20 helicopters laid out in an airfield where they're separated by maybe 20 meters, 30 meters, then actually, that's not really good use of Storm Shadow. But if you've got an ATACMs that can do that, that is massive. Like, I think this is hugely significant.
Again, there's 4 major airfields in Crimea with probably 100 fixed-wing VKS fixed-wing assets between them at any given time. The Ukrainians could absolutely trash all 4 of those airfields with a fairly limited number of ATACMs.
Just listen to that. I mean, that is massive.
VKS fixed-wing assets between them at any given time. The Ukrainians could absolutely trash all 4 of those airfields with a fairly limited number of ATACMs in a way that just really wasn't feasible with Storm Shadow, Scalp EG, or even, Taurus, hypothetically. So that this was really a truly new capability that they will have going forward now.
It's not, this is a new capability. This is a new, it's not just like, ATACMs, a unitary warhead of ATACMs would be great for hitting Kerch for example, maybe. Although arguably, actually, that's what Taurus and Storm Shadow should be good at doing. But actually, that's just adding a little bit onto what they can already do. This is a new capability. I know, Matt, and I know you've just heard this, but I'm going to replay that for Matt's benefit, because I think this is so super important.
Sorry, everyone.
Magnitude of effect on the battlefield that Ukraine can achieve is, again, strongly dependent on how many they get. But if they get, say, 100 over a month or so, that would be rather significant. Again, there's 4 major airfields in Crimea with probably 100 fixed-wing VKS fixed-wing assets between them at any given time. The Ukrainians could absolutely trash all 4 of those airfields with a fairly limited number of ATACMs in a way that just really wasn't feasible with Storm Shadow, Scalp EG, or even, Taurus, hypothetically.
So that's why I've changed my opinion on the use on the delivery of this type of ATACMs as opposed to the unitary warhead. I really think this is something of a game changer, because when you talk about the front line in Zaporizhia and the ability of the helicopters to hammer at better range the Ukrainian mechanized equipment, then you need to do something about those helicopters, and no one's been able to touch those Berdyansk parked helicopters. Well, now you can, and you can take them all out in one fell swoop. What are you going to say, Matt?
Oh crap! What was I going to say? Oh yeah, sorry. On Twitter or X or whatever it is now, we were seeing posts today about Russia possibly leaving airfields in Crimea. So, in anticipation.
So you've beat me to it, because actually I was going to say no. This is such a good point, mate. I was going to say that the leaking of this information is actually, I'm talking about it because it's out there. Everyone's talking about it. They've done videos on it, so whatever. But the fact that this came out, that they were this type, will mean that the Russians are now acting. They should have announced that after they used them. And actually, you had a massive potential for the Ukrainians to have taken out a whole load of Russian air bases like that they now no longer can do, or maybe arguably can't do, depending on what the Russians do to react to that. So I think that information coming out was a real shot in the foot. But let's listen to this.
Or would you also want the unitary warhead?
Personally, I think the cluster munitions are much more significant than the unitary warhead, just simply given the nature of many of the time-sensitive targets that they're going to want to prosecute with ATACMS are also typically area targets. Again, SAM batteries, where all the components may not be, literally parked right next to each other, where you may not have its position exactly. You can sort of lean on the cluster munitions to compensate for that. There's definitely a need, I think, for unitary ATACMS for M48s, M57s, or M57E1s. My thought immediately goes to, for example, command posts that are time sensitive. Obviously, they've been using Storm Shadow or Scout BG for that quite significantly. But there's often times where it may not be possible if that command post is about to be relocated, where executing a raid with Storm Shadow may not be feasible. In those cases, having unitary ATACMS would definitely be helpful. But in general, I think the M39A1s with the submunition warheads are much more significant in terms of expanding the target set that they can effectively hold at risk.
And there you go. And I think that was really super interesting to look at. Now, actually, what happened a bit later, I don't know if I can find it. Yeah, here, I think you have Andrew Perpetua then asks, how far does it spread? Yeah, here we are. I'm going to dip into it back here. Hopefully this makes sense.
Diverged. And so you got S-300P operated by the Air Defense Forces, S-300F, which is just a navalized version of S-300P. That was what was installed on Moskva.
So I'm going to talk about what they're just talking about there in a second. But he measures those 5 helicopters. And he says, well, that's just one ATACMS air, which can take out 5 helicopters. And then just to the right of that is another 5 helicopters, or another few helicopters there. So we've seen this in Birdie Ants. So these ATACMS can have, I think, significant effect. Now, what they're also talking about on this live stream was what Kilo was just mentioning in the live chat, was only the newest S300 variant is a real threat to ATACMS, and numbers are low. And this is really interesting. So the S300V or the S300P, whatever, the newest variant is the one that they need. But as they say, they don't have many of them. So the ability to shoot down these ATACMS is really, the Russians really don't have it that much. And I'm really excited about that, but I'm also really pissed off that this was announced yesterday and leaked, because if the Russians have come out today, Matt, and said that, hey, we're going to move all our airframes from the airfields, then that's really annoying, because they can't then destroy them.
Well, yeah, there is that, but it takes time to organise all the planes to actually leave and where they're going to go and all that. So, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Can I just say a big thanks to just a few more thanks? Dennis Wimmert, I list from the States, or maybe Wimmert if you're from the States, every morning. Thanks for what you do. No, I really appreciate that, Dennis. Thank you for listening in all the way from the States. A great international audience here. Really appreciate all of you guys. Well, at least most of you. I know some of you in Thai now, Trevor. Anyway, just going to go now to Koldi Badwa, who says Politico joins a quiet on ATACMS, but the most important news in this article is about Scale PG. So this is a French version of the Storm Shadow missile, something I have not seen reported until now. This makes the delivery of ATACMS and Taurus even more important. France was Ukraine's only hope of new built missiles. So from the Politico article is, however, France will halt shipments of the Scalps in the near term because they are needed for Paris's own coffers, said General Stéphane Mille, Chief of Staff of France's Air and Space Force, in a Monday briefing. Mille also hinted that Paris is rethinking how much longer it can continue to send significant amounts of its own weapons to Ukraine. So that's a really bad bit of news, I guess, for the Ukrainians in terms of that cruise missile capability. I mean, France can make them, right? It's a French company that makes those missiles for UK, Germany, and France. So if it's just about money, then there is money to support Ukraine, and these are such important weapon systems that I would have been upping the production of these months ago. But I'm sure they've been thinking of that and doing that. But anyway, I thought that was important to note. Anything else to add to that, mate?
I did just have a thought. Oh yeah, that was it. I was actually talking to one of my friends who was in France as a refugee at the moment the other day, and she said they're being moved again. They're being put into residence now on the border of the cities, or right out on the outer limits. So, starting to get them cheaper housing and trying to combine multiple families into one home and things like that. So it looks like the French are possibly, yeah, running out of money, or they've spent a lot of their own money, and they're starting to become aware of it, and they're trying to,
Yeah.
find ways of saving money. So yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. This goes back to what I was talking about earlier. This is the comment from someone on my thread. So Neil, I don't know what the actual name is because it doesn't come up on when I look at it on YouTube Studio. TTV Neon. So it is that actually. Anyway, they say here, my friend that works for Lockheed Martin, so they make the ATACMS, told me while we were having a discussion about this, he told me with the PRSM, so these are precision guided missile replacements for ATACMS, due to replace the ATACMS, one reason I can only think of is that we have if we have a confrontation with China and Taiwan, that with the stocks NATO has, they'd be used up in 1 day or two for a shock and awe effect to create distance and ruin formations and transport and infrastructure, just due to the massive amount of numbers China has in personnel, that they would allow us to use a new missile system of the PRSM to do even more work, as they won't know how to react to something that hasn't been used. As well, some may be converted to be used in the Dragonfire system. What I would give to Ukraine is the A10s, so and so on and so forth. Just this is talking to the idea that actually with ATACMS, you have to have the ability to be able to prosecute two front lines at once successfully. That's part of the US military doctrine, as far as I understand it. And so, therefore, that's the issue to look at with regard to ATACMS provision. However, they have been provided. How many? And are they kind of ones that are effectively obsolete anyway? Probably. Anyway, moving on. No report says about arms concern Rheinmetall supplying Ukraine with 5 more Surveil Spire mobile recon stations, as well as a Luna NG recon drones. The company in a statement claims that, quote, the Ukrainian armed forces will be deploying those systems within a matter of weeks. Again, upping the ISR capability of the Ukrainians here, the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. Again, I talk about there being an asymmetry here. So whenever you hear a Western nation or allied nation give stuff to Ukraine, whenever Ukraine get this stuff, it's what are Russia getting? Like, is this just increasing the asymmetry between the two forces? And I would say yes. Sticking, I think, with Germany, I finally have more information to share with you, says Diadua. This is a donation from the manufacturing company Quantum Drones. The company will donate 100 Trinity drones, a mix of all variants, tactical, F-19 and Pro, to Ukraine. The company spokeswoman confirmed this to me. So German drones are being provided, quite a lot of drones actually. They've provided in the past, and that is continuing. So that's good news. And then we're going to just remain on kind of German stuff that's been given. This is another comment from Mr. Grimshaw. Very interesting SATCOMs and hub stations. So this is from the announcement made yesterday of the stuff Germany was giving. These use the 2 Bundeswehr permanent comms satellites. These provide battlefield comms to command posts and are to NATO integration standards. It's what the Very High Readiness Joint Task Force use for multinational comms. In other words, some of the stuff that's being provided to Ukraine is really high quality comms satellite equipment. And that's fantastic. Also talks about the Vicent there and whatnot. So thanks for that. It was such a great range of expertise we have on this channel. It's really, really awesome. So this is from Alma. Thank you very much. ATPG, the ATACMS.
Euro.
ATACMS of good info. Thank you. Thanks for that. I really appreciate that. And thank you for the support as well. Absolutely awesome. What's that, mate?
It's just some random stuff in chat, but I did actually wanted to say to the little whiskey shop that I do have the can you read that? There we go. I do have the bottle of Lafroig here now, so we're onto
Freud.
the Scotch and
Is that where you went? Is that where you rented?
oh,
Or
I had
just
the
a little
toilet,
Jimmy? Little Jimmy.
and the and grabbed something to drink because
Good on
I
you.
ran out of tea.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, because you
and
said you weren't
AJ says
drinking.
he's coming
Yeah.
over. Yeah.
So moving on to Canada. Canada will join a coalition to train Ukrainian pilots and service personnel to work on F-16 fighter jets. We will direct instructors to train Ukrainian pilots and service personnel on the F-16 and maximize their use of the transferred fighters. So Canada really stepping up to the plate there. In fact, there's more to be said on this topic, where Trudeau has announced a $480 million aid package, including F-16 training. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced further aid for Ukraine, including 650 million Canadian dollars, 480 million US dollars for 50 armored vehicles, as well as training on F-16. The funds will be used over the period of 3 years, and vehicles, including medical evac vehicles, will be built in Canada. So this is all part of the, like, when you do give aid, it's about stimulating your own economy. Ottawa will also send trainers to help Ukrainian staff operate and maintain F-16 fighter jets. It's the Canadian Department of National Defence looking at. Oh no, that's someone asking that. Now, what's interesting is this is the single biggest donation, military aid donation, that the that Canada has ever given. So that's fantastic for Canada, as mentioned here. So lots of stuff being given over. Really good from Justin Trudeau and Canada. So much appreciated by the Ukrainians, no doubt. Now, the Czech Republic is negotiating. There's a couple of really important points to be made about airframes here. One is that F-16s are really coming online. There's lots of people offering frames and training and whatnot. So that's good. Second point is the Czech Republic is negotiating with Sweden about the possibility of training Ukrainian pilots on the Jazz 39 Gripen fighter jets on its territory. So then we're starting to get more formal things put in place for training on the Gripen. The Gripen are going to be super, super useful, arguably more useful than the F-16s in many regards, like the ability to fire the Meteor, the ability to land on roads, on short runways that have really low maintenance lines associated with them. They are cheaper to run than F-16s. They're cheaper per mission, per flight hour. Loads of advantages that the Gripen have. There just aren't very many of them, right? But it's great that there's a more formalized structure being put in place for the Ukrainians to be trained on them and provided with these airframes. Now, the next thing I'll say about that is this. So this has come out today, and this is a bit of a shame. So I was really excited about French Mirage being given. There is talk about them being trained on these. According to Yuri Ignat, the French Mirage 2000 aircraft are not an option for Ukraine. Right? Any assistance is important to us, but not in the form of a Mirage 2000. We've talked about this many times. Well, what can an A-10 attack aircraft do? Russian air defenses will simply destroy it. We need to gain an advantage in the air. We need a multi-role aircraft, modern, capable of performing all the tasks I mentioned earlier. So in other words, something like the Gripen and the F-16. Ignat stated that Ukraine requires aircraft to provide air superiority, deter Russian aviation from our borders and occupied territories, strike ground and surface targets, protect airspace, and destroy cruise missiles and drones. Therefore, he says, we cannot afford to take everything from the aviation inventory today. It's not rational. It will simply exhaust our personnel. We need to focus on one, at most two types of multi-role aircraft capable of performing the tasks I mentioned. Mirage 2000 is an outdated model, and France has much better aircraft, as does Europe. So we are considering the aircraft we have been talking about. So transferring the Mirage 2000 is not a rational decision, and mastering them would only drain Ukraine's aviation resources. Now, I mean, the way he said that, he probably could have said it a bit more nicely to the French, but I guess that's correct. You've only got so many pilots that you can put into potentially 3 airframes. Well, that's just too much of a logistical burden, a maintenance burden, and a pilot burden. Let's just get it down to Gripen and F-16 and go for that. Unfortunately, obviously, France, do have a number of of airframes that would fit, would be useful to Ukraine, but evidently not quite useful enough. I don't know if you have anything to say on that, mate.
Damn it, I did. Yes. Let me just remember what it was. I was going to say 3 aircraft types will overload Ukraine. It's not just about the planes, the maintenance staff, and that, but logistics, obviously, for them all. But more importantly, if you have 3 different types of planes and you've got to keep moving them around to your different airfields to make them harder to be, hit, you're going to have a lot more problems constantly having to ship all that inventory around to all the different airports as well, or
Yeah,
airfields.
absolutely.
So it's going to be it would be a massive strain having 3 different
Yeah,
types.
yeah.
So
Thanks, Lawrence, who I think is
cool.
in Germany these days at the moment, or has been.
Yeah.
Anyway, Lawrence, thank you. That's really, really kind of you. Always a great supporter of the channel. Thanks to all of you. Really super kind. Right, last thing to say concerns the last thing to say on the military aid or aid in general. Ukraine has received the 8th tranche of macro financial assistance from the EU to the amount of 1.5 billion euros. This was announced by Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal. That's going to be vital for Ukraine to stay on its feet, operate its government as obviously it needs to pay its pensions, pay its teachers, etc., etc. So that's really good news. Now we're going to move on to geopolitical stuff. The European Commission is ready to approve the start of negotiations with Ukraine regarding EU membership. The European Commission is expected to recommend launching a years-long succession process next month, but it may insist on progress in some priority areas, including corruption, as interim steps. And that's why I talk about how things like solving corruption are not only morally good and right and proper, and something Ukraine would want to do irrespective of any other variables, but they need to do it in order to accede to the EU and to get funding from the IMF and World Bank and so forth. So it is in their best interest to stamp out corruption, as well as it being morally great as well. So that's good news, and things are obviously moving at a pace with European accession, but I can't see that would really, you're not going to get any accession to the EU for a good few years and until the war is over. Canada as well. So Canada is a really interesting place, and hopefully, when we speak to Mark, who's a great supporter of the channel, Mark Bisque, that was one of the live chatters earlier, super thanks and whatnot. He lives in Canada, as far as I know, and they've got a really big diaspora community of Ukrainian diaspora community, and so that's why they are such strong supporters of Ukraine. Well, anyway, they've imposed 63 sanctions against Russian individuals and entities. Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau has announced 63 sanctions against those, according to Pravda. So it's good news there. And then we go on to, we're sort of trundling towards the end now. Many of you will be very happy to know. So Poland's Prime Minister has warned Zelensky to never insult Poles again. This was reported by the agency PAP. Quote, I want to tell President Zelensky to never again insult Poles, as he did recently during his speech at the UN. So I think there's a difference between the Prime Minister and the President at the moment in their rhetoric. Poles will not allow this, and protecting Poland's good name is now not only my duty and honor, it is the most important task of the government in the Republic. In the current geopolitical context, we will defend all our arguments, the agency quotes Morawiecki saying. Recall the Ukrainian President Zelensky during the 78th session of the UN General Assembly in New York said that the country was trying to preserve land routes for grain exports, but it was, quote, worrying to see how at this time some people in Europe, quote, play solidarity and arrange political theatre, making a thriller out of grain and, quote, help prepare the stage for the Moscow actor. Now, that's probably ill-advised rhetoric from Zelensky, I'd say. Like, although that might be genuinely correct, okay, you've got to do a bit of realpolitik here, and Poland are such massive supporters of Ukraine. You don't want to let this spat about grain get in the way of that. And it appears that with the elections coming up and playing kind of a populist card here, the Prime Minister is going to maybe use that to his advantage to gain votes, but also it is a bit of a damage to Ukrainian-Polish relations there. Bloomberg reports the US has asked Poland for an explanation regarding the termination of support for Ukraine. But then we heard yesterday that actually they haven't terminated support, that they're just, it was a misinterpretation of what was said. However, there are clearly issues between Polish politicians and Ukraine. And then on the other hand, we have Duda, who is a president, then saying the grain dispute will not disrupt good relations between Poland and Ukraine. The disagreement over grain exports should not upend Polish-Ukrainian relations, according to Duda yesterday. So I don't know, it's all a bit of a hot mess, but you appear to have the president saying one thing and the prime minister saying another, and Ukraine saying things about grain because grain is so important to the Ukrainian economy. That if they get screwed over in grain, then they're economically screwed, like on a much bigger scale than if, say, some other sector was affected in Ukraine. Like the agrarian economy in Ukraine is they are breadbasket of the world, and it's massive for them. So they're obviously going to be super sensitive to issues with grain exports. And the issues within Eastern Europe of nations not wanting a cheap influx of cheap grain from Ukraine. I mean, this is going to play merry havoc with their own farmers. When you talk about Poland having a populist leader who probably has greater support within the rural communities and not the metropolitan communities of Poland, then you can see that he's going to be siding with his farmers and using that to drum up support with the coming election. So it's just a bit of a hot mess. I don't know if you've got anything to say to that.
Yeah, I do actually, because this is going to be really interesting in the future when Ukraine does come into the EU. I mean, this is setting down the foundation for Poland resisting, I don't know, however it's going to be. But look, Poland should just be saying Ukrainian grain can transit, but it can't be sold here, and end it like that. And if they can't police the transit of grain, then you got to look at your internal things. And a bit of perspective too. I think it's a little bit silly of the Polish PM to start a fight, an argument, whatever you want to say it is, over grain when you've got a country fighting for its survival, compared to, we've got some grain here. Keep a bit of perspective over the whole issue. If Russia gets hold of those grain fields or the wheat fields or whatever, then Russia's going to be dumping it cheap on the world market and destroying, or affecting Polish farmers as well.
There's an important point to be made here. I'm going to make some points about the EU, right? I was involved before Brexit I literally publicly debated Brexit in Bournemouth, I think 3 times. But I'm not going to make any claims about Brexit or either pro or anti-EU here. But I just want to explain to some people American might not understand the EU in some respects. And a lot of people get the EU wrong. And the reason they get the EU wrong is because the EU is a bit of a big walking contradiction. So what do I mean by that? So what you have, on the one hand, people complain about the EU because it has too many rules and regulations, right? And they say it should be neoliberal and free market. But on the other hand, the EU is entirely neoliberal and free market. Like the basis of the EU is that you have free movement of capital, labor, services, and products and whatever. So you have free movement of everything and no tariffs. And it's basically a free market ideal. It's a free market trading bloc. So on the one hand, you can't complain it's all about rules when it's like the basis of it is not having rules, so you can get free movement. But then you can complain it's neoliberal and it should have more. So it's because it's a bit of a contradiction. It is a neoliberal enterprise that also seeks to have good moral regulation as well, and that is your big kind of weirdness about the EU. It's just a bit of both. When it comes to things like Ukraine then entering the EU, there's going to be all sorts of interesting stuff going on because you will have, as you say, the breadbasket of the world pretty much, then part of a free trade trading bloc. And if that's going to mean a massive influx of cheap grain into EU and therefore no tariffs on it, and that going forward, then that will affect farming within the EU. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So I can imagine going forward there might be some friction as a really big agrarian economy enters the EU like 5 years down the line and might have cheaper labor and cheaper output, and that will affect, you know, agricultural communities all throughout Europe. But anyway, you know, that's something a little bit further down the line to consider. But I just thought I'd mention that people often get the EU wrong. They don't quite understand what it is, and the reason they don't understand what it is because there's a whole hot mess of a bunch of stuff. And yeah, it's just, yeah. Hopefully I've communicated that adequately enough, but probably not. And in fact, Niels Clement here, thank you, Niels from Denmark, says, I'm enjoying this, keep talking. Well, you know me, that's never a problem. It is, in fact, many people just wish I would stop, like just stop. And we're going to come to an end fairly soon, actually. So I know that there are a few people in the threads asking if we can answer comments. So I think I'll answer questions like Robert Amity might have said something earlier. I haven't seen any questions. I've been unable to read the live chat apart from like the odd one here and there. Is there anything that's particularly worthy of discussion? Thanks, Niels.
Honestly, not what I've tried to bring anything to your attention that has been, but yeah, it's incredibly difficult to jump between the two. I need to get my screens organized and get the chat over the other way, and yeah. Anyway,
you'll be happy to know that,
yeah.
that Sarah, my partner's daughter, was delivering me a cup of tea. So I don't need to. I've got a few more minutes left of me.
I've been neglected. My wife is watching a movie and just left me with a bottle of scotch. So
just, I don't know that doesn't sound neglected to me. That sounds perfect. Not today, not being with you, whatever. I don't think there's any news that's particularly come out in the last sort of half an hour or so since in the last half an hour with regard to adding to anything that's already been said today. I think we've covered a lot of what has been going on. There's so much news coming out at the moment. That's why my daily news pieces are longer than normal, because obviously we've had the UN convening. We've had all sorts of issues between, say, Poland and Ukraine. We've got lots of talk about ATACMs. We've got strikes going on all over the shop. So that's why some of my videos have been a bit longer. I do apologize. Sorry, not sorry. Are there any sort of final questions from the audience before we kind of wrap things up? So here's one from Robert Amity. What is Putin going to do when he comes to the realization that he's going to lose this incursion? That is like the $1 million question. It is. I was thinking about this question, as many were, right at the beginning of the war, because as I've told you a million times, like Putin lost the war within a week, right? When it became a war, it started off as a special military operation. Then he realized that he couldn't depose the government and exchange it for a puppet government. And that's when it became a war, but he was not prepared for a war. He's prepared for a special military operation. That's why they kept calling it SMO, even though it's not. It's obviously a war, but it would be a realization that they got everything wrong from the very start. Garbage in, garbage out. So there is winning the war is all about, well, okay, what are your objectives? And those objectives were wrong from the beginning, because the objective was plan A. Objective was depose Ukrainian government, put in Russian puppet government. That failed, and they didn't have a plan B. So they went in with only plan A. They failed within a week, and then they've spent a year and a half trying to work out what the hell it is that they're trying to achieve in Ukraine. And they said, okay, we're gonna take Kyiv was the next one. Then that failed. It's like, we're gonna take, as I've shown you before on my map. It was like, okay, so our plan B that wasn't the initial plan B, because we didn't have a plan B. So we had to create a plan B, which is like, okay, let's invade Kiev, and it becomes a sort of a war. And then they're like, they couldn't remotely do that. They failed at that. So then it's like, oh my goodness, okay, let's hold on to maybe a few places, Kharkiv. Let's have a big chunk of the east. And then they're like, okay, we can't do that. Let's have a slightly smaller chunk of the east. And then you had the Kharkiv counteroffensive and the Kherson counteroffensive, and like, okay, let's have the Donbass. And then it was like, oh, we can't even have that. Okay, let's have Bakhmut. Literally, that is one of their objectives now. They're like, they can't hope to get the Donbass. They've lost Kherson. And so in my books is the only winning they can have, inverted commas winning, is to somehow maintain the land bridge to Crimea. This is all they can achieve. Now, if Crimea is rendered kind of impotent by the strikes that are taking place on Crimea, then all of that is pointless. So the question that Robert has is so pertinent. It's like, well, actually, I don't think you can even achieve your minimalist goals here at the moment, which is retaining Crimea. And with Ukraine being in the ascendancy, and I think going forward they will be, yes, it's going to be tough, and they're going to lose people, and it's going to take a lot longer than they might have expected, and it might be another year of fighting. Okay, yes, but the end result is still the same, which is Russia can't win. Okay, so what does he then do? And the problem is, I am agreeing with other analysts when they say the war will never end with Putin still in charge. So there is no way this war ends, because it can't end, because it's only going to end with some kind of Ukrainian upper hand. And Putin cannot allow that and remain in power. So therefore, it can only end. This thing can only end with Putin not being in power. Now, does that mean he dies of natural causes? Does that mean there's a coup? Does that mean there's a political revolution? Does that mean there's a popular revolution? I don't know. But I don't think he can. That question almost assumes that he would be in charge when the realization is that he's lost. But I don't think that he can be in charge when the war finishes. What do you think, mate?
I think Robert. He's already realized that he's lost. I think he probably read your article. Was it 3 days after the war started?
Sadly, not nearly enough people did.
No, look, I think he's realized he's lost. Come on, it's been going on for 1.5 years, and it was only meant to take a couple of days. He's got to be either the world's stupidest person, if he hasn't realized it already. The thing is he doesn't care about sending, shall we say, lesser Russians to die. He doesn't care. It's not him. It's not his family. He's got his money. He's got his mansion still, and people are still prepared to die to defend him. Not the Russian way of life or anything about Russia. It's all about Putin. I think he will get taken out by his own people in the end, but I don't think we'll see it for another year or so.
The problem is there are more internal security service members than armed service members in Russia, so they have a really strong hold on the population. It's very difficult it's easy for us to sit and say, oh, the population should rise up, but it's like, if they rise up, then they're going to be like 20 years in a gulag. So you can understand why people don't rise up in Russia. You'd have to be absolutely confident it's going to work.
There was a really interesting thing I was once asked, actually by a Russian guy, how did it work in Maidan, where when they were protesting in Moscow about Putin's election victory, and it failed. And I said to him, well, you guys went home. That's the difference. You cared for 10 hours for your rally, and then you went home. And then at that point at night, the police came and arrested ringleaders, and so they started to do protests the next day. And it starts to break down because they kept going home. At Maidan, they all stayed together, slept together, everything together. The police couldn't break it up, and that's the real difference. Russian people have tried a few times to protest against Putin. he doesn't care because the Russian people go home where they take themselves away from the mass, and they're easy to be picked off. So, yeah.
Yeah, this is a really this is worth just doing a whole video on this. So Viggo, thanks. He's such a great supporter of the channel. Putin's life depends on the continuation of the war. This is so this goes to exactly what I was saying. Like he will not be in charge if this war ends, right? He is existentially linked to this war, and he must know that. And so the problem there is that if you think your own life depends on this war, then you end up giving yourself permission to make freaking crazy decisions based on if the war starts going south. So actually, because he's existentially linked to the outcome of the war, that means he's actually more likely to do something truly bonkers. And that's the worrying thing. This is a Putin paradox that I've talked about. I've done a video on this, which is the better Ukraine do, the more likely it is that Russia are going to do something nuts. There's your problem. And that leads into the kind of escalation narrative coming from certain people, maybe in the West. But it is kind of understandable, because when you understand that he is that precariously balanced, there you go. I don't know if there's anything else that needs to be added or asked. There's obviously lots of questions. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to kind of draw it to a close pretty soon. Let's see if there are other questions. Russia have more forces to control Russians than they have to fight Ukraine, as their budget says. Yeah, that's the way I understand it. Certainly was the case, and it probably still is the case. That they've traditionally had more Rosgvardia, more internal security. When you talk about their intelligence services working in Russia, and that means it's very difficult for there to be any meaningful opposition to anything that's decided by the Kremlin. It's especially when all the democratic mechanisms, the checks and balances that should be in place for a functioning democracy have been stripped away. Then you have a dictator who's able to do anything, and anyone that shows dissent is locked away. Any threat to him personally, like Navalny, is either locked away and put in prison, or poisoned, or in his case both, or you fall out a window. You get rid of all of your threats. The reason why he's got Gerasimov and Shoigu in those prime positions, and they're not very good, arguably, is because they're not very good. They are not a threat to him to run the country. If he had really competent people, so this is what happened when Surovikin, who was seen as pretty competent, as horrible as a human as he is, the butcher of Syria or whatever, he was sided a little bit with Prigozhin. Well, Prigozhin was a strong threat to Putin. Surovikin was a strong threat to Putin. Surovikin, where's he now? Arrested for ages and then flown out to Algeria. He's not going to be a threat going forward. He's lucky he didn't fall out of a window. And Prigozhin, he fell out of a plane window. And so Putin has a situation where he's safe going forward, but where does this end? And I don't know that I have an answer to that. And that kind of, does make me worry. Sorry, I've been bumbling on too long. Any thoughts?
No, I was just seeing the Brexit conversation starting now in chat.
I knew I shouldn't have mentioned it. So I have a broad church here. All of you guys know I'm a liberal lefty, right? And there's an awful lot of you who are interested in the war who are not liberal lefties, okay? There are some of you who are, and there are some of you who are staunchly right-wing, and you let me know it on a very regular basis. But it's great that hopefully we can have this conversation respectfully, and you understand my position, because you let me know that, I like your war stuff, but as soon as you start talking politics, please don't, and so on and so forth. And that usually translates to you're saying something I disagree with, so therefore shut up. Which I understand, that's human nature, but it's a broad church here, guys. It's an interesting team, and thank you for making it so. Yes. Anyway, I guess we'll kind of start wrapping things up. I keep saying that I'm going to hopefully do a frontline update, but I might not have time. It is a weekend, but I want to have time, because there's obviously a lot to say. If you can talk for just a couple of seconds about something.
About something.
Matt,
let's talk about my opinion of Brexit, shall I?
No, don't start that. You're not allowed to talk about that.
Oh, geez, what am I meant to talk about?
So why do you
I'm
think?
looking.
Why
I'm
do you
looking to
think?
chat.
So I'm just
Mhm.
going to go into the frontline stuff to look at a couple
Yeah.
of frontline pieces. But I'm just interested why you think there's definitely going to be something in 3 to 4 days taking place.
Can I say just it's a feeling? It's due. Ukraine wants to do a hard push and have Russia on the back foot when it does actually start to rain a bit more. And I know I said earlier that the rain won't make a huge difference, but it will. In the same context, if you've got control of the main roads, then it's going to make enough of a difference. Um, can I get away with saying it like that? Because I
Yeah.
can't say much else from comments
Yeah. That's fine.
that
No,
I.
that's cool. Thank you.
Yep.
That's really good. What I was going to say myself, just a few like frontline update bits and pieces. I've lost what that was going to be. I have to look at that later. So Moscow boys are in trouble around Novoprokopivka. So the idea that around Novoprokopivka and Robotyne and indeed Verbove, the Russians are having a bit of trouble. It's getting closer and closer to Novoprokopivka. South of Robotyne, says Global War Monitor here. And then a further one saying that Ukraine is securing or capturing more positions from Russia along the fields near Klishchivka. So that's up in Bakhmut area. The grey zone has been expanded to reach the railway line, as I mentioned earlier today. So I'm just going through a bunch of my sources. It won't be in any particular cogent order. The commander of Ukraine's southern counteroffensive says Ukrainian forces broke through near Zaporizhia's Verbove in the direction of Tokmak, a strategic hub for Russia. I won't show you this video, but there is an awful lot of combat footage coming out. Sorry, I still have a comment on the screen. So Russians are incapable of holding the line near Verbove, reportedly. So it's looking better and better for the Ukrainians there. Ukraine is pounding Russian forces in Oleshki, and that's what I was talking about. There might be a bit of to and fro in that area of the Dnipro River. Left bank of the Kherson, right in front of the Antonivsky Bridge. However, it must be said that the Russians are using aviation really frequently. And I said this yesterday. Andrew Perpetua talked about it in his live stream as well. So anyway, talking about a breakthrough in Verbove there. But just to remind people that right up and down the line, particularly the Dnipro, the Russian aviation with the guide bombs, the FFB 500s, are really very active. And they're absolutely hammering a number of places. Also, right up and down the front lines. So that is, not good for the Ukrainians, and something that they'd hopefully want to do something about. Whether they can hit these bases, air bases that carry some of those fixed wing aircraft in occupied regions, and this is where it comes back to the ATACMS discussion, and where I do think there's a possibility that it can have some battlefield implications, the delivery of these ATACMS. I just wish they had announced it after they started using them, and we could have seen some surprise air bases get hammered with cluster munitions. Because you go to Berdyansk and you look here, obviously this is not recent footage, but if you look at the air base at Berdyansk, where is it? Where are you? I'm not going to be able to find it now. But there's an air base at Berdyansk where you've got helicopters all lined up there, and if you, it's probably not this one, but if you're using cluster munitions that can have a 130 meter spread for their submunitions to explode, then you can take out a shed load of these airframes, and then that has a direct impact on what's going on the front line. So anyway, that's probably where I'm going to leave it today. What are your final words, mate?
Absolutely nothing. No, sorry. I just come from looking at your map and that, and then turned to chat, and the brain went to the different mode, and yep.
Yeah, Thierry's exactly right. So even if
Yeah.
they can't destroy, so even we're hearing today that they're moving the airframes out of these air bases, this is the power of something like ATACMS. Is like you have to get them to Ukraine for it to have changed their behavior. So this is one of the outcomes, is that if the change of behavior is that they have to move their helicopters out of the entirely out of the occupied region, right? Then that's a massive success. You don't have to blow them up. They just can't use them. They can't store them there. And it depends on what the range of the helicopters are, in whether they could be used to bring to bear on the front lines here. But can they be, can they be based over here and do that effectively? What's their flying time? How long can they hang around and acquire a target? Or is it a case that they can store them in occupied territories, but they only have one here, one there, one over here, a couple here, and then what effect does that have on the application of these airframes to the front line? So yeah, I think that's a great point, Thierry. Changing the Russians' behavior is super important. Anyway, thanks so much for everyone for being a part of this. Thank you so much to Pete. I'm going to give you the last words, Matt, so don't worry. Think of what you're going to say. Thank you so much to Celestial Veggie, Mark Bijcu, as ever. What a legend. Mitch Mazarol, super cool. Ball Fella, likewise. And I forgot to say 666 there. Nice one. I see what you've done. Brian Ivey, AJ Simo, Paddy Pliner, Louise Foley, Mark Gould, incredibly generous, Mark. Thank you so much. Dennis Wimmert, Per Leusberg, welcome on board. Little Whiskey Shop, thank you. Legend. Alma, really appreciate your generosity. Lawrence 22 and Niels Clement, really, really kind people. Thank you. Hopefully this was interesting and informative. Matt, last words for you.
I just want to say thanks to all my friends in the chat who, during the week, I don't know if you read it, JP, my aunt was diagnosed with kidney cancer.
No, I didn't. Sorry to hear.
And the next day I was down getting a skin cancer biopsied. And of course that killed my twin sister. So it's been a bit of a rough week.
Really?
And
goodness. Wow.
So yeah, just so much support in chat from all the guys there. That it's just been totally awesome. And
that's brilliant.
I'll let everyone know everyone's diagnosis and all the rest of it when we know more. So
yeah, well, thanks to the team. That's awesome for supporting. And Matt, sorry I didn't read that. And this is odd because I spend like 25 hours a day reading YouTube comments, right? So that I missed that a whole conversation is a rarity.
Yeah.
I really need to stop reading so many comments. I have a life to go and lead, and there are people out there that need me. I think. Well, maybe I just think they need me. They're quite happy
with
me being sat in here. So. Anyway, all the best to you, Matt, and big love to you. And stay on the line, mate, and we'll talk after this. But in the meantime, thanks everyone. Thanks to Matt for helping. Thanks for all your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you tomorrow.